Rune Soldier Ranma Story. Rune Soldier Ranma Story link. https://www.fanfictioncom/s/16502/1 Ranma plus Rune Soldier crossover genre. Fantasy/adventure author. Hungmian link. https://www.fanfiction.net/u/7890/last updated December 11th 2004 words 84,306 rating T status in progress content Chapter 1 to 10 of 10 chapters source fanfiction.net summary. Ranma gets transported to the world of Rune Soldier Louie thanks to a wish. Chapter 1 Prologue. Starting over Rune Soldier or anime disclaimer. Help. I've started writing about characters that don't belong to me and I can't stop. Note. This story begins sometime after the Moxibustion Point storyline. Thoughts prologue starting over Ranma Sodom, heir to the Sodom School of Anything Goes martial arts, sighed as he limped home. Today had been an especially bad day. It had begun during lunch at school as his uncute fiancée had decided to poison or treat him to what she had referred to as lunch. Of course, his mouth had moved faster than his head and he had told Akan that a true martial artist shouldn't resort to biological warfare. And like clockwork, the youngest daughter of Suntendo did not take kindly to his rude, but honest opinion of her attempts at culinary creation. She was all set to try for her record at sending Ranma into Leo, when who should appear but, "Hey Arian. Arian honey. Arian darling." And of course, when these three showed up, guess who is not too far behind? Ranma. Prepare to die. Ranma Saodiomi. You foul sorcerer. Release AKNED Indio and the big-tailed girl. CHARRRG. Shampoo is mine. Well, you get the picture. Just another normal day. After fending off those who wanted him dead, and evading those who wanted to marry him in a long and intense running chase/battle, Ranma ended up with a collection of bumps, bruises and cuts, as well as a sprain in his left leg, hence the limp. The entire debacle had reduced several blocks of Nirima and the surrounding districts into disaster areas. One can bet that insurance rates skyrocketed, while property values plummeted. Ranma groaned as it was near sunset when he finally made it back to the Tendo home. His face's appearance was one of great depression and contemplation. As he came through the door, he was greeted by Kasumi. "Hello Ranma. You missed dinner." The big-tailed 17-year-old sighed and nodded. "Yeah, well I ended up near Mount Fuji today and I kind of hurt my leg. It took me longer to get back." "Oh you poor dear. Here, let me help you with that leg. There we are," the eldest Tendo's sister said as she finished wrapping up Ranma's ankle. Currently, he was sitting on his futon in the guest room. Janma's son smiled as he admired her handiwork. Thanks, Kasumi. You're pretty good at this. You ought to be a nurse. The brown-haired girl blushed a bit at the simple compliment. I've been watching Dr. Tofu at his clinic, and I've had some practice with tending to Akan's injuries whenever she trained. When I was young, I had dreamed of going to Tokyo University to become a nurse, but when Mother died, you had to take care of the family, right? Ranma finished as he showed some unexpected insight. Kasumi was a bit surprised to have Ranma understand her situation. Ever since he had come to her home, she had always thought that he only cared about the martial arts. Ranma noted her puzzlement and gave her a lopsided smile and a shrug of his shoulders. Hey, even I noticed how much you do for this family and how you put up with Pops and me. We can be real stupid jerks sometimes, especially with the trouble we cause. Oh no. You're no trouble at all and, hey, you don't have to sugarcoat it. Ranma said as he held up a hand. I've had a lot of time to think about it while walking back here, and I just realized that I never really shown any appreciation for what you've done for me since I came here. Please, you really don't. No, let me finish. I need to say this to you. Kasumi, you deserve better than this. You shouldn't have to put up with a freeloading dope like me or Pops. And I'm to blame for a lot of stuff that's put you and the rest of your family through the ringer. I've got a big mouth that I don't know how to shut. I'm way too cocky for my own good. And I just don't know how to get out of the messes that I get into, either by me or because of Pops. Ranma, I've never heard you talk like this before. Usually, you're always so sure of yourself. Yeah, well that last fight made me start thinking about some stuff and it finally got through my thick skull that my life is a total mess. The constant fights, the fiancés, the people after me because of something Pops did, my own ego. I guess it's all starting to get to me. Ranma, the martial artist, took a deep sigh. You know, Kasumi, at times like this, I really wish I could go back and restart my life. The Cat Cafe. What is that great-grandmother? Shampoo asked as she saw her relative with a strange-looking pendant. Cologne smiled as she held up the ancient heirloom. It's a very old, very precious heirloom of our family. It's a magical pendant, which is able to grant the bearer a single wish. It is one of the few treasures that Akko's eyes had not stolen all those years ago. The purple-haired girl's eyes lit up as she thought of the possibilities of such a magical item. Is really true, great-grandmother? The Amazon elder smiled as she could guess what her ayah was thinking of. Yes, child. This could finally be the thing to bring son-in-law into the tribe. However, there are a few stipulations to this necklace. First of all, it can only be used once every 500 years, and only outside during a full moon. That's the main reason why I haven't used it before. Secondly, the person must carefully phrase the wish, as the pendant will fulfill the wish word for word. It may take the wish literally, and there have been records of a wish going totally awry. Finally, once you have made the wish, You cannot undo it, nor do you have any say as to how the wish will be fulfilled. I must be very careful. Cologne nodded. Indeed. And tonight is the night in which the pendant will be active. By midnight, Ranma will finally be yours. Shampoo cannot wait. The Amazon said happily as she began to dream of her life with Ranma as her loving husband. Another Amazon became very excited as he heard of the elder's explanation of the necklace. Moose had been listening in on the conversation and saw this as the best opportunity to finally claim Shampoo as his bride. Now the trick was to get that pendant away from Cologne. Knowing that he didn't stand a chance in defeating the old crone in physical combat, he instead decided to use his Juzen Kyo curse to his advantage. Quickly spotting a bucket of cold mop water, he dumped it over his head and waited for the right moment near the doorway to the restaurant. As Cologne and Shampoo were heading toward the front door to make the wish, the duck boy tensed up from behind a stool. Then when he saw the magical necklace, took off and snagged the chain in his bill. What the? Cologne had been taken by surprise, as she had not expected Moose to try and steal her magical item in his Juzen Kyo form. She could only curse after the duck as it soared away into the night sky. Moose was elated as he flew high above the city of Tokyo with the necklace in his bill. The full moon was rising toward his zenith, and he was all set to make his dreams come true. At that moment, the mystical jewelry glowed with an eerie and a strange voice was heard from the pendant. What is thy wish? Taking special care not to drop it by flying vertically, Moose made his wish. Quack! 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 Translation: I wish to be married to Shampoo. However, the pendant's response was, I do not understand. Please state your wish. The myopic hidden weapons master realized that as a duck, he couldn't speak. He would have to land and find some hot water before making his wish. However, at that moment, Fate had decided to play another joke upon the mortal realm, specifically on a certain martial artist who was currently more depressed than Ryoga. At that moment, the midnight flight from New York to Tokyo was on its way to the airport, and with Moose flying high above the city, he inadvertently wandered into the jetliner's flight path. Moose barely managed to swerve out of the way as the huge plane thundered past him, but the duck was caught in the transport's jet wash, causing him to tumble in the air. This made him lose his glasses and the necklace. His only chance to winning Shampoo plummeted toward the ground. He tried to fly down after it, but with his poor vision and the darkness of night, he lost sight of it within a few seconds. On the roof of the Tendo Dojo, Ranma sat in silence. He couldn't sleep at the time and had decided to do some more thinking. This had not been a good day. After Kasumi had tended to his ankle, who should appear but Akan, and she had immediately jumped to the conclusion that Ranma had been flirting with her sister. Ranma had been a heartbeat away from gaining more frequent flyer miles by Arakan, but Kasumi had chided her sister and explained that she had merely been tending to his wounds, which she added, that Akan had a part in causing. This made Akanda thinking that Ranma had turned her sister against her, and she went on with her temper tantrum, which in turn had her father and Ranma's father team up, saying that he should apologize to her and have the wedding tomorrow. This got Ranma's temper steamed and things went downhill from there. As he sat on the roof, Ranma sighed as he began listing out loud of the things that had caused his life to be such a mess. Unknown to him, a certain magical item was falling toward him. Still intent on granting a wish, the pendant began listening for anyone who was making one. It soon locked onto Ranma's sorrowful voice. "Man, my life is total crap. But then again, I really don't have anyone to blame but Pops and myself for that. I've got this stupid fear of cats, which I could do without. I may be the best martial artist, but what has that gotten me? Nothing but people after my head, either to kill me or marry me. I don't know much more than what Pops has taught me, and it just seems to get me into more trouble. I don't have the slightest idea how to straighten out this mess. That uncute tomboy never believes me. That Amazon is always trying to trick me. Putin's not a friend, she's also a fiancé. Pops and Mr. Tendo are always harping on me to fulfill that pledge of honor. Damn, I really hate that. I give nice people like Kasumi more trouble. And on top of all of that, I've got a stupid Juzenkyo curse that gives me nothing but headaches, headaches and more headaches. My life became nothing but crap ever since that stupid training journey. I really wish there was a way that I could start over without those problems." At that moment, the pendant fell in front of the young man's face for one brief moment and said, "Wish granted." Ranma Sodom disappeared within a flash of light, and the pendant then shattered into 100 fragments when it struck the roof tiles. With its destruction, the energies released went out of control, as the magical item did its best to fulfill the parameters of Ranma's unintentional wish. Ranma groaned as he came to. At first he thought he had fallen asleep on top of the Tendo roof, but immediately found out that he was in a forest with huge trees, and that he was lying near a river. The skies were clear and it was morning. As he looked about, he saw a rustic-looking village in the distance toward the west. His confusion grew as he tried to determine just where he was and how he got there. He decided to wash up at the river and winced as he realized that the water was probably cold. There was a bit of a morning chill in the air, and he decided that he would have to build a fire to heat up some water. Otherwise he would be stuck as a girl for a while. Without bothering to glance at his reflection, he knelt down at the water's edge and used his hands to splash some water onto his face. He waited for a usual tingle that accompanied his transformation from a he to a she, but for some odd reason, it never came. Looking down at his chest, he expected to see a swelling of breast, but all he saw was his flat pectorals. He then looked down the waistband of his pants. What the? I'm cured. I'm cured. However, just as he was about to jump for joy, he looked into his reflection in the water. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw a face that he'd not seen in 11 years. It was a really cute face and seemed to emit total innocence and trust to anyone who gazed upon it. Then he looked down at his hands and saw that they weren't quite as well developed as he remembered them to be. And it had just occurred to him that his clothes were very baggy. He was almost swimming in them. Then he realized why everything seemed so big to him. Ranma was 6 years old again, and it was a safe bet that he wasn't in Nirima anymore. The pendant had given him his wish, literally. A chance to start over with none of the problems he had before. He was no longer in the place, which caused him the same headaches. The question was, where was he? To be continued. Chapter 2 Chapter 1 Back to the Basics. Rune Soldier or anime disclaimer. Rune Soldier and Ranma 1/2 aren't mine, but I wish they were so I wouldn't have to disclaim all the time. Thoughts. Chapter 1 Back to the Basics. Nice try, kid. Come back in a few years, when you can put up more of a fight. The gang of teenage street toughs laughed as they walked away from the battered and bruised form that was lying in the gutter. Just how dumb was Ranma? So dumb? How? Apparently, dumber than advertised. One little, inexperienced boy versus 5 larger ones, had possessed some very nasty weapons, and had no qualms about beating him to a pulp. Retreat should have been the best option, but Ranma had chosen to stay and fight. Bad decision, but Ranma had not been known to use common sense on a regular basis in the past. Pride was what had driven him, and what was often the case, had been his downfall. Young again, Ranma Sodom picked himself off the ground and began checking his injuries. Those tough boys had certainly worked him over and had taken whatever little money he had managed to get a hold of. Things hadn't been easy for the past month when Ranma suddenly found himself in his 6-year-old body and on a world that resembled medieval Europe. Eventually, he had figured out that light he had seen on that fateful night must have been some kind of power that granted wishes. For a moment, he had thought he had seen a shooting star or something along those lines. Then he remembered the wish he had made of starting over. What was that old saying? Be careful of what you wish for. You might just get it. The former heir to the Sodom school of anything goes had been getting beat up on a regular basis after discovering that with the disappearance of his stronger, older body, was also the absence of his skills, strength and speed. He had been reduced right back down to what he had been at the beginning of his original training journey. A young boy with lots of potential, but no experience or training. As such, he was now easy prey for any predator of this world, be it beast or bully. With very little in the way of money or possessions, other than the oversized clothes on his back, which he had roughly cut down for his smaller frame, Ranma had been forced back to his original roots to survive, which was to steal food, clothes and money from nearby villages. Though he found it distasteful, as he now had a sense of right and wrong. Unlike during his first times under Ranma, he really didn't have much of a choice. He lacked the strength or size to work for anyone, and foraging for food in the forest was hard. He hadn't realized until then, but how much he had taken Kasumi's wonderful cooking for granted. Thinking of when he had last seen one of the few people who were ever kind to him, made Ranma become even more depressed. He hoped that she was doing all right, now that he was gone. It was a bit odd that he wasn't thinking much of Akan, Shampoo, Yukio or any of his other former fiancées, but seeing as how they had treated him when he was 17, one couldn't really blame him. They had all thought for him as if he had been something of a prize, a trophy to win, without even asking as to how he felt. For Akan, he was just a convenient punching bag to be abused whenever she felt like it, and only to be fought for whenever it was possible that he would be taken away from her. For Shampoo, he was just a trophy husband, and Yukio was just as possessive. As for Sun and Janma, well, Ranma didn't really care if he were to never see them again, along with Ryoga, Kuno, Mithus, Cologne, Nebiki and Akpo's eyes. That meant no more death threats or schemes to get him hitched to that uncouth tomboy. There would be no sneak attacks or attempts to get him to wear a bra. Though with no curse, that was a moot point. There would be no potions or magic spells to get him to marry into the Amazons. No blackmail was always a plus. Most importantly, he didn't have the Juzenkyo curse, or the Neko Ken. The wish he had made had stated that he didn't want the problems of his old life. Being reverted back to his younger self, or starting over as he had phrased it, meant no girl curse and no cat fist, therefore no fear of water or anything feline. He didn't know why he still retained the knowledge of his former life, but he wasn't complaining about that. So his current situation did have some good points. However, the cons still outweighed the pros. Since his first childhood, Ranma had taken pride of being the best martial artist. However, at present, he was far from the best. In fact, he was barely a tiny shadow of his former self. He had tried to prove himself on many occasions, but it always resulted in very painful consequences. He had tried to stand up to those bullies. However, with only a 6-year-old body and no training to work with, he was seriously outmatched. At one time, he had nearly bled to death when a tough boy took out a knife and stabbed him. Ranma's body was just not sweet for the intense and complex fighting style of his former self. He had tried to fight the way he used to, but his limbs didn't have the strength, reach or dexterity as before. He wasn't as resistant to impacts as he used to be. Speed was down and even the Sodom final technique, run away, wasn't very effective with his short legs. Even his special techniques, such as the chestnut fist, were practically non-existent. Although the majority of his martial arts abilities were gone, he did still have some key stores, so it wasn't a total loss. But it was mostly unfocused. Ranma had tried to recreate his ki projectile, but it was extremely draining and he could only produce harmless flashes of light to momentarily blind his opponents so he could make his escapes. Things were bad and he knew that things were going to get worse. Later in the forest, as the child Ranma tended to his bruises and began setting up a fire, he started to contemplate his options. His ego wasn't going to help him at all. With no martial arts skills to properly defend himself, he was up the proverbial creek without a paddle. The usual beat 'em all up and I'm the best attitude just wasn't working. He couldn't back them up with his body the way it is. He had no food, no home and no family or friends. He had no idea of how to get his old body back and even less to getting back to his own world. At this point, he realized that things weren't going to change and he had to face facts. He would have to go through the trials and tribulations of growing up again in this strange and harsh world. Starting over indeed. Ranma knew that if he wanted to survive, he would have to learn how to fight all over again. He had the knowledge of all that he had trained for in his first life. Furthermore, unknown to his former rivals, he had also been secretly learning their techniques as well, before his unintentional wish. Just because Kuno, Mythos and Ryoga were idiots, didn't mean that their moves were totally useless. Ranma's talent always lay in his ability to learn techniques quickly. Show him a move and give him a reason to learn it, and it usually didn't take him long to master it. He rarely had to be shown twice, and with all of his constant battles with the eternal lost boys, the Blue Thunder, and that Amazon moron, he had enough exposure to their techniques to be able to figure out how they worked. It was this ability of understanding the how if not the why of a technique, which had made him such a great martial artist. And there was no better motivation than survival. I'm going to need to start from the basics. Strength and speed training are top priority and I have to toughen up so I can take hits. I guess the easiest way to get tougher is to do what Ryoga did. But it's going to take longer for me to master the Bakusai Tenketsu in this body. 1. Ranma sighed as he went to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be painful. As he slept, he was unaware that someone was now observing him. Hidden behind a nearby tree, a slender figure with blonde ears gazed upon the sleeping child. She had been periodically watching the boys, ever since the tree spirits had told her that a small human was living in the forest. Though her tribe's laws had forbade her to interact with any member of that race, she somehow found the youth to be strangely interesting and decided that it wouldn't hurt to see just what he would do. 3 weeks later, Ranma breathed deeply and stared at his target, as he hung suspended while sitting cross-legged. Hanging before him on an elaborate, but crude pulley system, was a very ominous-looking rock. One arm was bound, save for the index finger. The other arm was free to trigger the release mechanism and reset the pulley. The son of Ranma growled as he stared at the boulder. On his face and body were various bruises from his previous attempts to master the breaking point technique. It had taken him several days to set up the apparatus, and he had been constantly beating himself almost to the point of unconsciousness. After starting up his training regimen of basic katas and weightlifting, beginner's level of course, he had also begun planning to remaster the techniques that he was familiar with, starting with Ryoga's breaking point, which had been taught to him by the old ghoul. I'm close. I know it. Come on. If a moron like Ryoga can do it, then so can I. I can feel my body getting tougher from the training, and I know that if I can just focus my ki in the right spot. The young elf known as Celestia giggled as she watched from her hiding place in one of the tall trees. No matter how many times she had seen it before, it was so funny to watch. Humans often did the strangest things, but what this boy was doing certainly took the cake. For the past few days, the youngster had tied himself up and had been poking with his finger at a boulder as it crashed into him. Just what was he trying to do? Wham! KRGH. Celestia watched as the youth shook his head to clear it, and then began pulling on a rope, which used a set of pulleys to set the heavy stone back again. Oh number, he's not really going to do that again. The blonde elf thought. Wham! KRGH. I don't believe it. Why is he punishing himself like that? Wham! KRGH. What's the point of all of this? Wham! KRGH. He's going to kill himself at this rate. Celestia watched for a while longer at Ranma's antics, then decided to leave the human to his insanity. Using a simple spell to conceal her departure, the mystical being was gone in less than a heartbeat. Ironically, if she had remained for a minute more, then she would have witnessed Ranma's first milestone triumph. As the boulder swung toward him for the umpteenth time, the young boy began to see something within its granite surface. At first he thought he was just seeing stars from the last impact, but as it came closer, he began to see what appeared to be lines of light, radiating toward a single point, just left of the center of the rock. Realizing what he was seeing in his mind's eyes, he focused what little ki he could into his index finger and jabbed forward. BAKUSAIDNKDSU. WHABOM. Ranma smiled as the stone fragments rained down on the forest floor. Some of the pieces had impacted against him, but thanks to the training, he had barely felt them. A month later, Celestia was wondering just what the crazy human boy was doing now. She had seen him collect acorns and whatever nuts he could from the trees. At first she had thought he had been foraging for food, but when he started throwing them into a fire, then tried to reach in with his bare hands to retrieve them, she thought the human was completely without any common sense whatsoever. After watching him attempt to pluck the nuts from the fire and fail several times, she shrugged her shoulders and left. Ow! Damn, I forgot just how painful this was. Ranma thought as he waved his hands a bit after they had been burned by the flames. He took a calming breath and gazed upon the fire. Come on. I used to be able to do this without even thinking before. I know I'm focusing my ki right. It's all a matter of training my body to move with my ki. He paused for a long moment, letting the fire cook the nuts. Finally, he let loose with his technique. KDCHUDNSHINAMAGURIKN. Ranma winced as he felt the fire's sting, but this time, the sensation occurred more than a full second after he had grabbed a few nuts, which meant that he was getting up to speed, becoming faster. It's taken more than 3 weeks, but I've almost got it again. Another few days later, Ranma disdained the use of weapons. He knew that unless he had something to make up for his lack of reach, he was going to be at a serious disadvantage, especially against larger enemies with knives, swords, clubs and whatever medieval weapons they had. He needed an equalizer, until he was big enough to handle opponents unarmed. He could still fight weaponless if he had to, but decided that having a weapon would give him a better chance to survive. Since he had no money to buy a weapon, he would have to settle on making one. A staff was the most logical choice. It was nothing more than a simple wooden pole and it was cheap to make, especially in a forest. It would also be easy to replace if it broke. In addition to being a weapon, it could also be used for walking or other situations. He wished there was some bamboo, but he would have to improvise. After looking about for a while, he found a fallen branch from one of the taller trees and began refashioning it, using a small knife he had pilfered. His conscience gnawed at him for a moment as he remembered how angry the shopkeeper was when he stole it. He made a note to try and pay him back when he could. He had come to realize that he had to take responsibility for his actions. Living by oneself and being forced to survive does tend to make one grow up faster, especially when it was a natural second childhood. Cutting the branch down until it was the desired thickness, he then began wrapping a strip of cloth around the middle. The cloth had come from the remnants of a shirt he had stolen from a villager. The garment had been too large for him to wear, but the material was a strong silk, which he could use for binding, carrying and other such uses. He also made a note to repay for the garment as well. After finishing his new staff, the young martial artist stood up and started twirling it about, checking its weight and balance. He nodded in satisfaction and began a complex kata, swinging the 3-foot length of wood about at imagined enemies, using a few booking maneuvers as well. Though he despised Taekwondo Kuno, Ranma had to admit that the weapons added reach did help, especially with his current state. He then thought back to how Kuno used his wooden sword to cut through trees, concrete, and sometimes metal. The young lad assumed that it was a kind of key technique, which used one's own inner energy to strengthen an object. He had seen Ryoga do it with his belt and bandanas. If those dopes can do it, then I should be able to. I think my ki is strong enough by now. A week later. Why is he hitting that boulder with a stick? Celestia wondered as she saw Ranma repeatedly slam his staff against a large boulder near the river. Is he trying to get revenge on the rocks? She remembered back to when Ranma was doing the breaking point training. Once again, after the initial amusement wore off, the elf left the human boy to his nonsense. Of course, she missed the part when Ranma took one mighty swing and split the boulder cleanly in two. 2 months later. Now what's this all about? The elf was completely puzzled as she watched the boy try to cross the river. With heavy rocks strapped to arms and legs and one large boulder on his back. 2. He was attempting to run with the heavy load across the water. Is he trying to drown himself? Splash! I guess he is. Celestia saw the boy disappear under the water near the middle of the river, and though it was against the law of her tribe to interfere with human affairs, she decided to come to his aid. She was about to summon the water spirits to save the foolish human, when she then saw that he was still going along the bottom. A minute later, he surfaced on the other bank and kept on going. The elf developed a large sweat drop behind her head as she watched him disappear into the forest. Another 6 months later, the youth was feeling good, as his load felt lighter, almost as if it wasn't there. He had steadily increased the weight on his body as time progressed. He decided that now was the moment to test his abilities. If I can jump like I did before, or even better, then all that effort would have been worth it. I've trained harder now than I ever did with Pops. The 7-year-old began removing the heavy weights from his arms and legs, then let the huge boulder drop from his back. At this point, his body felt as light as paper. As he flexed his back muscles and stretched out his limbs, his heightened sense of awareness began to tell him that he had company. Like his other skills, his awareness of his surroundings, and especially his danger sense had been reduced to their rudimentary levels when he had been aged. After months of living in the forest and intense training, his awareness had been raised to a higher degree than what he had before that fateful wish. For the last several weeks, he had been sensing the presence of something or someone that had been watching him. He didn't sense any danger from the presence, but he couldn't tell exactly where it was. He just knew that the person was there. Shrugging his shoulders, he decided to just focus on regaining and improving on his original skills. Tensing his leg muscles, he crouched down, then jumped. From her hiding place, Celestia's mouth dropped open as she watched the boy attain an altitude of 50 feet. She continued to watch in amazement as the youth bounded atop the highest of treetops, then disappearing into the foliage. Since when could humans fly? The elf wondered as she had not sensed any application of magic from the boy. Another 3 months later, Celestia had been picking some rare herbs and roots when her elemental senses suddenly alerted her to a disturbance in nature. Using a levitation spell, she made her way to the top of a tall tree to look over the entire forest. She was quite surprised to see a funnel of air suddenly spring up in the distance, and she suspected that the strange human boy had something to do with it. Ranma was breathing hard as he sat in the middle of a crudely drawn spiral in the dirt. It had taken a lot of effort, but the Hiri Shotenfa had finally been remastered. It wasn't as powerful as it had been when he was a teenager, but still for more months Ranma breathed in and out slowly as he focused his concentration on a wooden target some 50 feet away. This was the final test. After relearning the Hiri Shotenfa, he had concentrated on regaining his ability to manipulate his own ki. Cupping his hands as if he were holding a ball, he brought them back toward his right side, near his waist. Blue energy began to convalesce between the palms and formed a small sphere, which gradually grew larger until MOKODAKABISHA. Throwing his hands forward, Ranma shot his ki forward. Like a cannonball, the orb blasted forth and slammed into the target, reducing it into splinters. All right. Ranma Sodom is back. The boy cried out. Though he was still somewhat lacking in certain areas of his former levels of skill and power, he had finally mastered all of his old techniques, plus some of his rivals. He felt as if some of his old self had returned, and now he was ready to go out and explore the world he was in. Watching closed eye, Celestial was now very impressed. Over the past 2 years, the boy had displayed abilities and powers that she had never seen before. She had seen him catch fish in the water without getting his hands wet. He had jumped to the tops of the tallest trees without any magical help. She had even seen him blow up a boulder with his index finger. And just then, he had let off a fireball. The elf kept on wondering just how he did it all. It couldn't have been due to all those ridiculous acts, could it? Celestial was a bit disappointed to see him getting ready to leave as he packed up his meager belongings into a small bundle and hung them on one end of his staff. She hadn't had such entertainment from a human in a long while. Having such a long lifespan tended to get tedious without some kind of amusement. As the boy began heading out of the woods and down the path to the nearest village, the elf hoped that she would see the extraordinary youth again. 8-year-old Ranma smiled as he walked down the path. He had decided that before he began his great adventure, there was just one little detail he wanted to take care of as he headed toward the village. Just outside of the village gates, hey look! It's that little wimp again! Ranma's eyes narrowed as the 5 boys who had tormented him 2 years earlier laughed at him. He stood with his staff slung over his shoulder, and waited until the bullies stopped laughing. He let his bundle drop to the ground, and held out his staff like a walking stick. I still owe you for what you did to me 2 years ago, the youth stated as his expression took on a serious tone. Lifting up his shirt, he displayed the scar where he had been stabbed on his left side. And I haven't forgotten about when you did this. Ha! The lead boy scoffed as he and his cohorts took out various implements, which included knives and short clubs. The leader wielded a wicked-looking dagger. And do you think your little stick is going to teach us a lesson? Oh, we're so scared. He continued to sneer at their diminutive opponent. It's been a while and I figure you've got some money, so hand it over, or else. Ranma smiled as he took a stance and held his weapon aloft. Come on. The group let off a series of guffaws before charging at the youth, intending to overwhelm him by sheer numbers. What they didn't expect was for their opponent to leap high above them. What the? How did he do that? He can fly. Ranma smiled as he came back down with staff held aloft. Nope. Jump good. 3. WHAP. One boy went down as the end of the staff connected with his face. Landing on one foot, the Sodom boy pivoted around and swung his weapon about, smacking another of his attackers in the temple. Using a feint to lure out another, he stabbed forth and poked his pole into a third boy's stomach, followed by a blow to the left shin. The bully howled at the pain and went hopping, then screeched as Ranma slammed one end of his weapon into the groin. The larger boy toppled over and laid on the ground, moaning and clutching at his privates. The fourth boy tried to bludgeon Ranma from behind, but the youth simply drove his staff into his enemy's stomach, driving the breath out of him and causing him to drop his weapon. A quick series of swings to the chin and forehead laid him low. Ranma twirled his staff and took a ready stance as he faced off against the leader of the group. His staff was behind his back with one arm while the other was held out. The leader gulped after seeing his partners taken down by someone who was barely half the size of the others. He looked down at his knife and back to the staff and saw the difference in reach. This didn't look good. Ranma smiled as he saw the sweat pouring off the forehead of his last opponent. Though it was not exactly the smartest thing to do, Ranma felt that he needed to teach him an extra special lesson. His grin became wider as he let go of his weapon and took a neutral stance, daring the other to attack. The tough took the bait, thinking that Ranma had lost his mind and charged at him. What could one unarmed little boy do against a dagger? Ranma proved just what he was capable of without a weapon as he dodged the strike, grabbed hold of the extended arm and twisted it down. A quick strike to the wrist nerves caused the hand to reflexively open and the blade dropped down to the ground. A rapid punch to the throat caused the bully to gasp, and that's when Ranma hopped up and let him have it. KDCHUDNSHINAMAGURIKN. The 150 punches to the face went by in the blink of an eye, and it took another second or two before Ranma's last opponent's brain registered the hits and he went down in a battered heap. The other bullies who had just witnessed their leader get pounded cringed in fear as Ranma casually picked up his staff and walked over to them. "So what were you just saying about money?" The boys let off terrified shrieks as they began emptying their pockets. "If you want money, here, take it." Hundreds of coins were tossed onto the ground before Ranma's feet, as the bullies got up and ran for their lives. Two of them picked up their fallen leader and hauled him off. In less than a minute, the group disappeared from sight, leaving Ranma with enough funds to last him for a good while. After paying off the shopkeepers for what he had stolen, filling his empty stomach and buying some supplies, Ranma decided to head for the city of Ophun. Unknown to him, a certain carriage was also heading toward the city. Inside it, a little red-haired girl with large glasses watched the scenery go by with a bored expression. Her father was taking her to Ophun to enroll her in the prestigious School of Magic, as she had shown some natural talent in sorcery. As the carriage bounced along, little Eva sighed. It wasn't that she wasn't looking forward to becoming a member of the Magic Guild, but she did want to have a little excitement. So far the trip had been pretty boring, and hoped that things would liven up once they reached their destination. To be continued. 1. Just remember that Ranma's a small boy now and it'll take him longer than a trained martial artist to learn the breaking point and all the other techniques. 2. I saw this on an episode of Samurai Jack. It also reminded me of Dragon Ball with Goku training under Master Roshi. 3. Also from Samurai Jack. Chapter 3 Chapter 2 Ho fun. Rune Soldier or anime disclaimer. What? You were expecting something? Okay. Rune Soldier Louie and Ranma 1/2 don't belong to me. There, I said it. Thoughts Chapter 2 Ho fun. To any passerby, Ranma appeared to be nothing more than a wandering 8-year-old street urchin. His clothes consisted of a ragged variation of his old training gi, with torn sleeves for better movement. On his feet were a pair of sandals, which he had fashioned from some old leather he had found at a tanner's shop. They weren't much to look at, but they were durable and easy to repair. His raven hair was tied back in a simple, utilitarian ponytail. Slung over his right shoulder was his wooden staff. Tied to one end was a bundle, in which his spare clothes and most of his other belongings were carried. Though he had eventually figured out Moose's hidden weapon techniques, he preferred to keep only his essentials out of sight, such as his money, knife and various survival tools. It had taken the boy 5 days to reach the city of Ofun. When he got to the gates, he was immediately refused entry by the guards as they thought of him as nothing but a homeless vagrant, which he was. Though the young martial artist could have put up a fight, he had learned that blindly solving problems with his fists usually resulted in consequences, and Ranma was not going to fall into the same pitfalls as he had done during his previous life. The guards were bigger, stronger and were armed with spears. As much as he wanted to test his skills against grown-ups, he decided that discretion was warranted. So he went on another route. As soon as he was out of sight of the guards, Ranma went around to an unguarded area of the city wall. Looking up and gauging the height from the ground to the top, he nodded and crouched down. With some effort, since he was weighted down with some luggage, he jumped to the top of the 50-foot barricade, then back down on the other side. Once inside the city, he blended into the crowds. As he walked down the main street of the city, which led to the royal palace, he thought about what kind of added provisions he could get and how to obtain more money. Stealing from a few villages was one thing, but in a city such as this, it was harder with the authorities nearby. Furthermore, his conscience wouldn't allow for more thievery unless it was absolutely necessary. The last thing he wanted was to grow up the same way as he had the first time, and end up like his old man. The mere thought of Ranma made the boy shiver with disgust. Becoming a fat, lazy, greedy panda man was something to be avoided at all costs. Well, I could try getting a job. Now let's see. What could I do and... The sudden scream broke Ranma's train of thought as he looked toward the source of the disturbance, which came from a nearby alley. He saw a pair of unsavory characters enter with malicious grins on their faces. The boy got the distinct feeling that they were after someone and that someone was going to need help. Looking about, he spied an adjacent alleyway and headed toward it. Once out of sight of any passers-by, He leapt high and used a triangle jump to get to the roof of a building, some 65 feet above the ground. He then began racing from one rooftop to another as he ran a parallel course with the bandits running in the alley below. Looking ahead, he spotted their intended prey and picked up speed. They were after a little red-haired girl, who was dressed in a pretty blue dress and was wearing oversized glasses. Sheila ran as fast as her little legs could carry her, but her pursuers were gaining on her. The 6-year-old girl cried as she frantically looked about for any escape routes. However, her efforts were futile as the alley suddenly stopped in a dead end. Trembling with terror, she turned about and faced her tormentors as they closed in on her. The bandits chuckled evilly as they each brandished a small dagger. They were unwashed and smelled. One grinned, showing yellow, rotten teeth. The other snorted as he scratched his behind. Stay away from me," Sheila warned as she prepared to defend herself. She held up her hands and began concentrating. The two bandits, however, didn't take her seriously as they continued to slowly advance. "Don't worry, little lady, we're not going to hurt you," one of the thugs said. "Yeah, we just want to have a little fun, that's all," the other chortled as he looked her over. Judging by the fine clothes she wore and the jeweled necklace around her neck, he figured that she was the daughter of some wealthy merchant who had gotten lost. The jewelry would fetch a handsome price and the little girl would provide for some amusement before ransoming her. It had been a long time. Sheila gulped as she wished that her father or Master Carwes was with her. She had just been enrolled in the Guild of Magic a few days ago. Both she and her father had been shopping for magic supplies and had gotten separated in the bustling crowds. She had been searching for her parent when these two had decided to accost her. As she found herself backed against the wall, she began to softly speak the incantations for the only spell she knew at the time. "Hey, what's this?" The first mugger wondered as he and his partner noticed that the girl's hands were glowing. Then suddenly, a bright flare of light appeared, causing them both to scream out as they found themselves blinded. Sheila ran past them, the instant after she had released her mystic flare spell. Unfortunately, she tripped over a small rock and fell face first onto the ground. Before she had time to recover, a large hand grabbed the back of her dress and hauled her up. "Well, it looks like we've got ourselves a magic user here," the first bandit said with glee. "This may be even more fun," the second one agreed as he held out his knife before Ila's terrified face. Tears began to stream down the girl's face as she knew that there was no one who could help her. Just then, something dropped down from above and WHAP. The man who was holding her suddenly screamed out in pain as something struck his wrist, causing the hand to reflexively open. Sheila dropped to the ground and began scrambling away. Her glasses fell off her face. The nearsighted girl probed with her hands while on her knees, searching for her spectacles. Before the bandit could reach out and grab her again, his breath was suddenly forced out of him. Something had rammed into his gut, causing him to stagger backward. The other bandit was just as surprised to see his cohort go down, when something hit his right shin, causing him to yelp in pain. His knife fell out of his hand as he clutched at his injured right leg while hopping on his left. A second later, he fell down on his back as one end of a wooden staff knocked him off balance with a blow to the left temple. Both men scrambled to get back to their feet. At this point, Gila found her glasses and put them on. Her eyes widened as she focused on what, or rather who had just saved her. Standing between her and her attackers was a young boy with a wooden staff. He looked to be about a year or two older than her, and had dark hair tied in a small ponytail. He was in a kind of wide-legged stance, and was facing off against two men, who each outweighed him by quadruple, and were armed with knives. Just what was he thinking? There was just no way a small boy could defeat. Gila's mouth dropped open. The boy hopped over the heads of his opponents, then delivered a fancy, reverse spin kick to the face of one, while slamming down one end of his staff on top of the head of the other. This caused the two bandits to stagger backward. As soon as he landed, the youth swung his weapon at his adversary's ankles, knocking them off their feet. Both landed hard on their backs. The two gasped for breath as he slammed his staff into their guts, then followed through with another series of hits to their faces. With a lazy backflip, he got some distance from them and once again stood in front of Hila to defend her. The thugs snarled in rage as they got to their feet and glared at the impudent child who dared to make fools of them. They became a little intimidated when Ranma began swinging his staff about in a complex kata with grace and speed. After displaying a few intricate thrusts and parries, he finished by twirling his bow about like a baton, then slammed it to the ground in front of him. With a finger, he beckoned them to attack, then pulled down one eyelid while sticking out his tongue. This angered the bandits even more. "You little brat! I'm going to enjoy cutting you up. You are so dead." They both charged at Ranma with the intent of exposing his vital organs to daylight, but the young martial artist had other ideas. Swerving to evade their thrusts, he jumped high, causing both men and Hila to gasp in shock as he reached a height of 25 feet and seemed to hover for a few seconds. "Huh? He can fly!" Ranma smirked as he came back down and introduced both feet to one man's face, then slammed the other with his staff. The two men went sprawling again as the boy backed away to get some distance, then decided to give them one final warning. Noting that the ground was covered in cobblestones and other kinds of paving material, he dropped his staff, crouched down, held up a fist with index finger extended, then poked the ground in front of him. "Puhwhom." The bandits became startled as the ground exploded around the boy, enveloping him a cloud of dust and sending debris flying upwards. When the dust settled, their faces turned pale as they saw Ranma now crouching in a deep depression. Small pebbles of stone pelted the ground like raindrops and large cracks from the hole branched out toward the two muggers. Ranma raised his finger and said, "Now if I could do that to rock, Think of what I could do to you. Dust clouds were raised again, this time marking the exits of the two would-be robbers, as they raced out of the alley as fast as their legs could carry them. Taking on a boy with strange fighting moves had been painful, but going against a magic user that could make them explode into 1,000 pieces was something they were not willing to risk their lives for. The young again Shodan took a deep breath and stood up. Looking down at his shirt, he began dusting off the powdered remains of rock and dirt from the front and shoulders. Though he could have beaten those two thugs without resorting to the breaking point, he was glad that they had fallen for his bluff. The technique only worked on rock and it had no effect on the human body. At that moment, some new people came running into the alley. In the lead was a portly, middle-aged man with a bit of a paunch. The little girl came out of her frightened and shocked state as she began running toward him. Neela! Neela! Father! Both parent and child came together in a warm embrace. Behind him, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard came up to his rescuer. He was wearing the elaborate robes of a sorcerer and in his hand was his magic wand, which was crafted from enchanted elven wood. His hair was brown with some streaks of gray running through it, indicating that he was nearing middle age. Following close behind him were two guards. Carways, the head of the Magic Guild of Opham, looked down at the 8-year-old and saw a boy with considerable raw talent. He took note of the hole he had created in the pavement and sensed a lingering disturbance in the ground's natural forces. He was uncertain of the spell Ranma had used to cause such a disruption and became intrigued. At a nearby restaurant, Carways, Hila and her father watched in disbelief as Ranma continued to wolf down food at an accelerated rate. They were uncertain if he was taking the time to chew. It appeared to them that he was inhaling his meal, and he was devouring enough to feed several people. Just where was that boy putting all of it? Smack! Gobble! Munch! Crunch! Gulp! Unknown to them, Ranma was actually eating only half of the food that was being served to him, and using his chestnut fist and hidden weapon skills to hide the rest. Who knows when he was going to eat this well again? As he watched the boy continue to chow down, Carwes became even more intrigued. He had begun to sense nearly indistinct applications of power emanating from the lad, but he couldn't identify the source, and they didn't match any spell known to him. He had heard no incantations, nor was Ranma using a magical item such as a wand to focus his power. However, Carwes knew he was using something besides his mouth to make that food disappear. After a while, Ranma decided that he was full and polished off the last of the dishes of food. He let off a sigh of contentment as he pushed the last empty plate away and used the back of his hand to wipe his mouth. Realizing that he was in polite company, he mentally chided himself and used a napkin while addressing his father. That was good. Thanks for the food." The older man smiled and nodded. "You're quite welcome, Ranma. It's the least I could do to repay you for saving my daughter, Hila." The girl nodded to her newfound friend with a bit of hero worship in her eyes. "Yeah, That was really neat the way you beat up those bandits and how you used that rock spell to scare them off. Rock spell? Carwes asked with interest. Sheila nodded as she began making gestures with her hands. It was incredible the way he used his staff. G-O-W. Wham! Those bad men didn't know what hit them. Then he used some kind of levitation spell to fly over them. Then he broke up the ground with a magic spell by poking his finger into the ground. Boom! She spread out her arms to describe what she had seen. At this point, Carwes knew that he had just found another disciple for his magic school. For a boy to actually know of a spell that he had never heard of, and a powerful one of that, meant that Ranma had the potential to be a great wizard. Furthermore, despite his appearance, Ranma seemed somewhat mentally older for his age. His speech implied some prior experience and he carried himself like a teenager, rather than an 8-year-old street urchin. He couldn't let such promise go and realized as he addressed the boys. I must say that I am impressed. Ah, thanks. Ranma replied with a bit of blush, though he decided to be honest with these people. But what I did wasn't magic. I don't know any real magic. Oh? That's not what I think. Carwes interjected. Anyone who can take on 2 armed bandits is able to levitate and cause the ground to break apart with a finger. Definitely has the potential to be a great sorcerer. I sense vast promise within you, Ranma, and I would like to invite you to become a member of the Magic Guild. Both Ula and her father let off a gasp of surprise. To be personally invited to become one of Carwes' disciples was one of the greatest honors one could receive. What was even more unbelievable was Ranma's answer. Well, I'm really honored, but I'm going to have to say number. What? All 3 said at the same time. The youth gave a shrug of his shoulders as he explained. It's not like I don't want to know some magic. I mean, it would be great. But what? You asked of her hero. But it's not for me. I've had some really bad experiences with magic before. And every time I tried to use it to solve my problems, it just caused more trouble for me. The last time I had a run-in with magic, it cost me just about everything I had and, well, I'd rather not mess with it anymore. But those spells you used to save me. You started. I told you. That wasn't magic. Then what were they? Carwes inquired. Ranma shrugged again. They're just some stuff I learned. I can say that they weren't magic. He was uncertain of how to explain his key abilities, and it would only raise more questions that he wasn't ready to answer at the time. He still had a lot of things to learn, and martial arts were his calling. He had been put through enough with Juzenkyo and all the other times he had encountered the mystic forces. Now that he had been given a second chance at life, he wasn't going to tempt fate again by meddling with sorcery. Besides, he still had wanderlust within him and wasn't interested in being cooped in a school, even if it was a magic school. Nodding to the head of the Magic Guild, Hila and her father, Ranma stood up, swept up his staff and belongings and bid his farewells. I thank you for the food and perhaps we'll see each other again. I'd better get going. Carwes, however, was not going to give up so easily as he reached out and placed a firm hand on Ranma's left shoulder. Wait. Please hear me out. It's not very often that I would ask someone to become an apprentice, but I sense great potential within you. It would be a shame to see such promise go to waste. Won't you reconsider my offer? Perhaps if I were to speak with your family? Ranma felt a pang of sadness as he brushed off Karwe's hand. I don't have any family. Not anymore. Are you an orphan? Mumber, I'm not. It's just that. Well, my pop is alive, but I don't care to ever see him again, and I don't even know if my mom is alive or not. There were a few people that were really close to me like a family, but I'll never see them again either. So you're all alone? Did you run away from home? No, but there were times that I wanted to get away from it all. Look, it's really complicated and I'd rather not talk about it. You're really nice and all, but I can't stay and I happen to like my freedom. Back where I came from, I was never allowed to do what I wanted and people were always trying to force me into things that I didn't like. They never listened to me, nor did they care about my feelings. There were some people who were kind to me, but most of the others considered me as a target to dump all their problems on. So thanks for the offer, but I've got to get going. Die. Before anyone could react, Ranma made a lazy backflip over his chair and dashed out of the restaurant. Carwes got up a few seconds later and tried to follow him, but as soon as he came out of the establishment, he saw no trace of the boy amid the crowds of people on the street. Ranma had effectively vanished from sight. For the next few weeks, Carwes went searching for the strange and talented boy, but he failed each time. There were the occasional rumors of an extraordinary lad helping out people though. Flashback 1. You say a little boy with a staff saved your life? The majestic portly man. The man nodded. Yes. You see, I had been choking on a piece of lamb in a restaurant and I would have died if it were not for a brave lad. He saved my life and got that piece of food out before it was too late. What did he do? Did he use some kind of healing spell? I'm not certain. As soon as I started choking, this strange boy came up behind me, made me stand, and tried to wrap his arms around my midsection. When he couldn't get around my body with his small arms, he then put his staff across my stomach about here. The man indicated the placement of the staff, which was below his sternum, near the navel and diaphragm. Then he pulled an end up on the staff while using his feet to push against my back. He broke his staff, but he also forced the food out of my throat. It was amazing, simply amazing. Very interesting, Carwes said as he thought about the ramifications of Ranma's act. Previously, there hadn't been any non-magical method to save a person from choking to death, other than physically extracting the food particle by means of a sharp knife, which was considered too dangerous. The man nodded in agreement. I wanted to reward the boy, but he said it wasn't necessary. even though it looked like he needed the money. He did, however, wished he had a new staff, so I had one specially made for him. After he had picked it up a few days later, I never saw him again. I'll never forget him, no. Flashback 2. He was a gift from Miley himself. A woman declared as she held her 7-year-old daughter close to her. If it weren't for him, I would have lost my little Cinda. What happened? Carwes asked. My daughter had been playing about at the bridge near the river when she fell in. The current was too strong and it carried her downstream. At that moment, a young boy with dark hair and a staff slung across his shoulder had been walking along the bank when he saw what happened. He immediately dove in after my daughter, just as she went under. She couldn't swim and I feared that I had lost my little darling. I ran alongside the bank, and I found the boy a few hundred yards downstream, just as he was pulling my girl out of the water. She was so pale and cold, I thought for certain that she was dead. Then, that wonderful boy did the most amazing thing and breathed life into her again. What? I swear by the war god Miley, that the boy had brought my little Cindy back from the dead. He laid her onto her back and began breathing into her mouth. I didn't understand what he was doing, but then he started pressing against Cinda's chest several times, then breathed into her mouth again. When I thought that he had gone mad, Cinda began coughing up water and breathing again. Then the boy did something with his hands to bring warmth to my daughter. It was a miracle. I can't explain it any other way. Most intriguing. And do you know where this boy is now? The woman shook her head. No. He didn't stay very long after saving my daughter. I tried to repay him, but he didn't seem to be interested in money. So I settled with giving him some food and supplies and I haven't seen him since. End of flashbacks. There were other stories about a youth with strange abilities, which made Carwes more convinced that Ranma had the potential to becoming a powerful sorcerer. He hadn't heard about a healing spell that could breathe life into the dead nor a way to cure a choking victim. And he had no doubt that Ranma had other hidden surprises. Now the trick was to convince him that the Guild of Magic was his destiny. That is, convincing him and the problem of finding him again. Whenever Carwes heard of a new rumor, he would quickly go to the place where Ranma was last seen, in hopes of catching him or at least find some clues to his whereabouts. However, he would always arrive too late and the boy would be long gone. I wonder what he's doing now. The forests near Othovan. Ranma smiled as he swung his new staff about in a complex kata. The weapon was better balanced than his old one and was made of finely crafted, hardened oak, painted with a smooth, black coating. It was longer than his former staff, at about 4 feet in length, but his recent growth spurt allowed him to handle it with ease. As he spun, thrust and carried the staff at imagined enemies, his thoughts went back to an old friend, Dr. Onotofu. Back in Mirima, during his previous life, he had spent a lot of time at the clinic, mostly due to injuries suffered at the hands of his rivals and fiancés. The good doctor, along with Kasumi, was one of the few people who had ever treated him fairly as a person, rather than as an object for revenge or a trophy to be won. During his visits and periods of recovery, Ranma would often read the books in Tofu's study. That was where he had learned the fundamentals of administering first aid and adersting, which included the Heimlich maneuver, CPR, some herbal remedies and various pressure points. He found those to be full and had committed several texts to memory. His knowledge had shown dividends as he had saved the lives of a few people and had gotten rewarded. He now had enough food and supplies to last him for a good 2 months or so. Plus the act of helping others had felt good. However, there were a few things that still irked him. Foremost among them was the fact that he was still in the body of a young boy. Though technically speaking, he was 19, his appearance still caused others to treat him like a child. At times it was extremely annoying, especially when people refused to take him seriously when he went out to buy supplies. They would say things like, "Where's your parents?" or "A boy like you shouldn't be out alone." Several times, a few people had offered to adopt him or take him to the orphanage. Some places wouldn't allow him admittance, as they thought he was underage. And those people who addressed him in that baby talk tone always gave him the willies. Of course, there were some advantages to being young again. Ranma was as cute as he had been during his first childhood, and by using that factor, he was able to get a few breaks without even asking. All he had to do was look longingly at a bakery or candy shop's display, and more often than not, someone would go and buy him a pastry or treat. This allowed him to indulge in his sweet tooth, something that he had rarely been able to enjoy during his first training journey, mostly because Ranma usually hogged all the good stuff. He could also use his boyish charm to attain lower prices and freebies. If there was one thing Ranma had learned from Nebiki, it was to capitalize on whatever advantages he had, for as long as they lasted. He knew he wasn't going to stay adorable forever, so he might as well enjoy his second childhood until he grew up. Again. 5 months later, Gila sighed as she and her group traveled through the countryside outside of the city. Though she had enjoyed her first semester in the prestigious Mystic Academy of Ofugan, she had often thought of her savior and wondered how he was doing. She shook herself out of her daydreams and began listening to her teacher as he explained the basics of magic and how they were related to the forces of nature. After a lengthy but detailed lecture, the magician then instructed his students to begin collecting the herbs and roots that they would need to mix in their potions. Gila and a classmate named Miki decided to explore a grove of trees, which they were certain that they would find the special roots for their healing elixirs. Miki was a cute girl that was the same age as Gila and had her long brown hair tied up into braids. The girls had become fast friends and did almost everything together. They had partnered up for this field trip and were confident that they would find what they needed in that grove. However, they would also find something else as well. That something weighed more than 900 pounds, with black fur, claws and teeth. Luckily for them, Someone else was also hiding in that grove. Come on, Miki. I'm sure we can find some spotted toadstools over there, Gila said as she led her friend toward the grove. The other girl nervously followed her companion. Like Gila, Miki was a conservative student who preferred the safe confines of the school rather than the outside open spaces. Like most of the other students, she wasn't into adventuring. However, since this project required them to seek out their own potion ingredients, they would have to face the wilds. Gila was the braver of the two and usually led on all of their excursions. As they neared the grove, Miki became even more edgy. Are you sure it's safe in there? Gila gave her friend a reassuring smile. There's nothing to worry about. Remember those defensive spells we learned last week? This should be able to protect us if there's any danger. Besides, Master Aridon is close by if we need any help. Now come on. We've got to get at least 2 pounds of toadstools or won't be able to finish our project on time. Okay. As the two girls entered the grove, a lone figure watched them from a branch in one of the tallest trees. He smiled as he recognized the red-haired girl with glasses. It had been nearly half a year since he had last seen her. Then he noticed with a frown that they were heading straight toward a very dangerous area. After making a staff appear from out of nowhere, he leapt from one tree to another, displaying great agility and balance. He hurried to get to those girls before they... Too late. Both Ula and Miki screamed as they were suddenly confronted by a large and very nasty-looking grizzly bear. As they had been looking about some hedges, the two magic students had inadvertently disturbed the beast, while it had been slumbering in the bushes. Now the bear was angered and ravenous, a deadly combination. Miki tried to run for it, but tripped over the hem of her dress and fell down. She bumped into her companion, causing Hila to also lose her footing. However, unlike Mika, Hila kept a cool head and began focusing her energies while chanting. Her hands glowed with a reddish-orange light as the bear advanced on them. Just as Miki let off another scream, Hila cast her spell and released a small fireball. Unfortunately, her aim was off and the projectile zoomed past the bear's head, impacting against a tree and caused its trunk to explode into flames. Hila gritted her teeth as the bear loomed over them. She had no time to recast the spell and braced herself for the end. I wish Ranma was here. At that moment, a battle cry was heard as someone dropped down from above. Thwack! Ranma's staff smacked hard on top of the bear's head, causing it to shake its head in surprise and pain. It turned about and let off a snarl as it faced off against the young again martial artist. Janma's son backed off a bit as he attempted to distract the bear away from the two girls. Remembering back to an old anime he had once seen, he called out to the animal. "Hey Yogi Bear, you ain't gonna find any picnic baskets here. Why don't you go back to Jellystone?" Though the bear didn't get the pun, the distraction worked as it started to advance on its new opponent. Yogi what? Jelly where? Hila wondered as she helped Miki to her feet. Though she was glad to see her savior again, she made a note to ask him just what he was talking about. As she began pulling her friend further away, she watched in fascination as Ranma took on 800 pounds of bestial fury. The bear was big, heavy and powerful. However, it was slow. And even though he had the body of an 8-year-old, Ranma still had the advantage in speed. His small frame easily evaded the swipes of the bear's massive paws. He danced about the animal, swerving and feinting to keep his foe guessing. With each pass, Ranma swung and thrust with his weapon. The added reach of his staff allowed him to stay out of range of those claws, as he continued to land quick blows and jabs to the beast's head and midsection. This made the bear even angrier as it continued to try and catch its elusive target. "Mila, what are you doing? Get out of here now, both of you," the boy shouted as he noted that the girls had stopped in their escape to watch him battle the grizzly. However, this proved to be a near-fatal mistake as Ranma's attention was momentarily distracted. That slight pause was all the bear needed as it swung with a paw and slammed the youth down. Its claws ripped the front of his shirt, drawing blood as 3 gash marks appeared on his chest. "Ranma!" Sheila cried out as she held out her hands and began chanting. However, with the bear looming over her friend, she couldn't get a clear shot. Miki was on the verge of fainting as she saw the blood on Ranma's chest. Flat on his back, the boy mentally cursed himself while biting back the pain. "Stupid! Stupid! Stupid! I let my guard down." As the bear lunged at him, adrenaline began pumping like mad as the boy thrust up with his staff, jabbing into the bear's unprotected throat. This caused the grizzly to rear back in pain as Ranma scrambled back to his feet. It was then that he noticed that things were getting hot. When he saw that the tree that Eva had hit with her fireball was ablaze and the flames were spreading, he became desperate. He had never tried this technique on a wild beast before, but it was the only way to get out of this mess. "Get out of here now!" Ranma cried out as he tried to calm down his roar and began circling the bear in a spiral. "But what about?" Sheila began. "I said, get out of here." With those words, Ranma swung his staff at another tree trunk, focusing his ki into the weapon. Using Kuno's technique, he sliced through the thick trunk and caused it to topple over, cutting himself off from the 2 girls and forcing them to abandon him. As the fire began to rage about him, Ranma kept calm and nodded. All the extra heat would help as he continued to provoke the bear by prodding and smacking it with his staff. If this worked, he could contain the fire and defeat the bear once and for all. If not, well, come on, you walking living room rug. I need you really mad. The bear roared as several strikes hit home. Oblivious to the flames, it charged right at him with the intent of tearing him to shreds. Perfect. Ranma thought as he completed the spiral. "Mila! Miki!" Master Aridon called out as he and the rest of the students came running toward them, just as they were exiting the grove. However, before anyone could say or do anything else, a shout was heard from within the burning group of trees. HIOIUSHOD and fa. Just about everyone present were knocked off his or her feet as a sudden cyclone of wind rocketed upward from the center of the grove. The flames were instantly snuffed out like candles as the trees were uprooted and blown away like matchsticks. The students and their instructor had to dive for cover as chunks of debris and clouds of dirt were thrown everywhere. A beastly roar was heard as a large, brown mass was sent skyward. For 10 seconds, the tornado continued to whip up gusts that threatened to blow everything away. Finally, the wind current slowed as the last of the rising dragon ascension wave died down. When Ela finally looked up from the ground, she immediately got up and began running toward the center of where the grove of trees had stood. In the middle of the now devastated area, lay one injured and exhausted martial artist. She knelt down beside his battered form and began checking his wounds. Ranma groaned as he tried to get up, but he was in too much pain. The Hirishoten technique had taken almost everything that he had, and the results had been more than he had expected. The bear had been blown away and the fires had been extinguished, but the feedback had been almost too much for his younger body to handle. He hadn't felt so weak since that time Happo's eyes had used that Moxibustion technique on him. At the moment he was suffering from major blood loss from his injuries and was losing consciousness. The last image he saw was that of Ela's concerned face as she looked over him. Then darkness fell. About 2 miles away, a middle-aged peasant sat on a large rock and wondered just what he was going to bring home to feed his starving family. The crops had yielded a poor harvest this year and hunting was scarce. Their food stores were almost exhausted and with winter coming soon, things were looking bleak. The main problem was getting enough meat to last them through the cold months. With a wife and 6 children to feed, the man began to suspect he would have to kill a grizzly bear. WHA boom! The man fell off his perch as a huge, grizzly bear came crashing down near the rock he had been sitting on. The peasant's first impulse was to run for his life, but when he saw that the creature was not moving, he gathered up his courage and approached it. His eyes widened as he saw that the animal's neck was bent at an extreme angle, indicating that it must have died from the impact when it landed head first. As a result, it was nothing more than a dead carcass. A dead meaty carcass. The man thought as he realized the boon he had just been granted. He then ran home to fetch his plow mule to drag his family's winter meat home. Not only would it provide his family with sustenance, but also its hide would make a fine rug. As he headed toward his cabin, he made a silent prayer of thanks to the gods for the unexpected bounty. Some time later, Ranma groaned as he started to regain consciousness. As he opened his eyes, his vision was slightly blurry and he had to squint for a few minutes before it cleared up. When he focused on his surroundings, he found that he was in a bed in some kind of elaborately decorated room. Looking down at himself, he found that he was shirtless and that his chest was tightly wrapped in white bandage. He carefully sat up and saw that his staff was leaning up against a chair at a nearby desk. It was at that moment that the door to the room opened up and several people quietly entered, one of whom he recognized immediately. Sheila. The young girl smiled happily as she came up to his bedside and took hold of his hands. Ranma. I'm so glad you're all right. Ranma returned the smile, and then looked up to his other visitors. He recognized Carwes, who had a few more gray hairs than he remembered the last time they had met. He was dressed in the same sorcerer's robes and his magic wand hung on the cloth belt around his waist. The head of the magic guild nodded to the boy as he and his female companion joined Elo at the side of the bed. The woman was tall and had long, dark auburn hair. On top of her head she wore a hat that looked like something a bishop would wear. On the front of the headpiece was a cross-shaped emblem. Like Carwes, she too was dressed in elaborate robes, but they were fashioned in a more holy manner, as if she were a member of the Christian church or Shaolin order. She gave Ranma a warm smile, which seemed almost motherly and made the youth feel more at ease. Well, Ranma, it's been a while, Carwes greeted. If I had known that we would meet like this, then I wouldn't have wasted so much time searching for you. You've been looking for me? The boy asked. Carwes nodded. Of course. Did you really think I would give up so easily on such a promising student, especially with your kind of potential? You told me what had happened. I am most impressed. You are the youngest person ever to be able to conjure up such a powerful wind spell. Even the most proficient of magic users must spend years of study to be able to manipulate air currents on the level that you had done. The 8-year-old shook his head as he made Elo release his hands. I told you before that I don't know any magic. The technique I used is just like all the others that I know. I just trained my body to. Yes? Carwes pressed. It's kinda hard to explain, but it ain't magic and I don't want to mess with it. Why not? The woman asked as she spoke for the first time. If Master Carwes believes that you lack promise, then shouldn't you try to explore that potential? Who are you? The woman smiled. Forgive me for not introducing myself. I am Jenny and I happen to be the head priestess of the Temple of Miley, the war god. I am a close friend of Master Carwes. He tells me that you happen to be someone of exceptional talent. So why do you not want to learn magic? Ranma gazed upon the strange woman with some confusion, then shook his head. Mumber, it's not that I don't want to learn magic, but I've had some really bad experiences with magic spells, potions and items. Heck, I got over a curse that stuck with me for a year and that was the cause of most of my problems at home. A curse? What kind of curse was it? Carwes asked. I'd rather not talk about it and besides, it's long gone now, so it doesn't matter. Look, I'm glad I was able to help and all, but I don't think that magic is for me. Thanks for the offer, but I think I'll be going and... Ow! The youth winced as he tried to get out of bed, but a sharp pain stabbed in his chest. Carwes shook his head and used a hand to gently push him back down. I'm afraid that you won't be going anywhere for a while, Ranma, you still haven't recovered enough. It took a very strong healing spell to give you strength, and several herbal elixirs to cleanse your wounds. Healing spell? Herbal elixirs? Yes. You were gravely wounded when we brought you to this Academy of Magic, and if it were not for the mystic healers, you would have died. You are alive, thanks to magic. Still think there's nothing we can teach you. Ranma became silent as the information sunk in. Carwes nodded as he continued. Ranma, I'm not going to force you to become a member of the Magic Guild. When you are recovered, you will be allowed to leave if that is what you truly wish. However, I only ask that you let us show you the advantages of knowing the mystic arts. You may find some things about magic that are not as distasteful as you believe, and if you choose to stay, then I will gladly take you on as my ward. You did say before that you had no family to speak of, correct? Well, no, I don't. Won't you stay for a while, Ranma? Please, Gila said as she put on her most adorable, sad puppy dog eyes face. The son of Janma considered the offer for the longest time. It would be camping out all the time and he would be promised a roof over his head and 3 meals a day. Since magic was a part of life in this world, it wouldn't hurt to know some things about it. And it wasn't as if Carwes was saying that he had to give up his martial arts training. After weighing all of his options, Ranma shrugged and said, I guess a few days won't hurt. To be continued. Chapter 4 Chapter 3. Here's Ranma again. Rune Soldier or anime disclaimer. Ranma 1/2 and Rune Soldier Louie are figments or someone else's imagination, so there. Thoughts. Chapter 3. Here's Ranma again. Ranma. Where is that boy? Foltest growled as he walked the corridors of the Academy of Magic. He was one of the elder instructors of the school and he didn't care for the rebellious nature of Orphoon's most promising magic student. Many times he wondered just what did Master Carwes see in him. The last 6 years had been nothing but torment for the mystic teacher. It seemed to him that Ranma's sole purpose was to put Foltest through hell. Oh, the boy had shown considerable talent. Even Foltest had to admit that. When he had first started out, Ranma easily grasped the basics of spell casting and potion mixing. He was the youngest disciple to ever conjure up a Hellfire Inferno ring on his first try. Unfortunately, that was the same day in which Foltest had lost all of his hair and was now wearing a wig. And he had really liked those robes, which Ranma had reduced to cinders. The troubles had not stopped since then. Ranma had shown a tendency to skip classes and disappear for hours, sometimes for days. He was notoriously lazy when it came to studying for exams, but he always managed to pass the practical application sections, though his skills were rough and needed refinement. He also tended to use too much power when casting spells. Last year, he had caused a flood in the Arboretum when casting a simple water summoning spell. The youth's most annoying trait was a mischievous streak that Foltest didn't appreciate. The dark-haired boy liked to have fun, especially at the expense of his teacher and fellow students. While the instructor prided himself as one of the most dignified members of the Magic Guild, Ranma just didn't care for authority. He would take any opportunity to embarrass the elder magic user and show up all those who scoffed at his lack of refinement. Those who teased him of his low-born origins and his fascination with those strange, unarmed fighting techniques usually weren't laughing much after Ranma got through with them. Incidents such as hanging apprentices in their underwear on flagpoles, causing their spells to misfire or making their rooms explode had been known to happen. Of course, the most frequent occurrence was that Ranma would simply beat the tar out of those who made fun of him. The Academy's infirmary was often treating students who had dared to cross the apprentice martial arts image. Despite all of Fult's attempts to discipline the boy in the ways in which an obedient apprentice should behave, Karwa's favored pupil refused to submit. He had been punished, oh yes, many times. Ranma had been forced to clean out the stables, work in the kitchens, and haul out the refuse. Jobs that required many people to finish were all piled upon him. The back-breaking labor without any magical means to assist him, should have humbled him, humiliated him and make him easier to control. Instead it only made him stronger. It was as if Ranma was daring Fultes to give him harder challenges. The instructor had even resorted to magical means to punish the rebellious student, even though it was forbidden by the Academy Council to do so. That magic reduction manacles should have worked. But to his astonishment, Ranma had found a way around that. Damn his natural aptitude for magical counter spells. Whenever something or someone knocked him down or temporarily got the upper hand, Ranma would come back stronger than ever. It was as if the boy thrived on adversity, which in his first life he had, and Fultes was nearing his wit's end after 6 years. Another thing that annoyed Fultes was the fact that Master Karwas always seemed to turn a blind eye to his ward's antics. Didn't he see the havoc that youth was causing to the prestige of the Magic Guild of Ophon? The dignity and reputation of the Academy would be in jeopardy if he were allowed to continue. Fultes had complained frequently to the council about the troublesome apprentice, but since Karwas was the head of the Magic Guild, Ranma's transgressions were either disregarded or he would receive light punishment. HMPH. Things wouldn't be this way if I were head of the guild, the magic teacher grumbled as he continued to search for Ranma. He turned a corner and headed down another hallway. A minute or so after the sounds of his footsteps faded off into the distance, a quiet sigh was heard from high above. Clinging to the rafters of the ceiling, left parenthesis using the sodom cling to the ceiling and hope they don't look up technique. A certain apprentice martial arts mage decided that the coast was clear. Releasing the grip he had with his fingers and toes, the 14-year-old dropped to the floor while twisting his body. He landed as quietly as a cat jumping down from a short ledge. Standing up, he then took out his boots that had been hanging from his belt when he had been on the ceiling. As he put them on, he tensed up as he detected the presence of another approaching him from the other side of the corridor, but relaxed as he recognized it. Hila, age 12, gasped as she rounded the corner and saw her classmate and best friend about to go out on another one of his excursions. She had grown considerably since he had rescued her from that grizzly and agreed to enroll in the academy. As she was nearing puberty, her body was starting to show signs of womanhood as it became more curved and taller. Though she had not openly admitted it to Ranma, she had been developing certain feelings for her rough and tumble playmate and had been hoping that he would notice the certain changes that her body was undergoing. Unfortunately, even though he was experiencing puberty for the second time in his life, and this time it wasn't being restricted as it had been under Janma's influence, Ranma only considered Hilo as his best buddy, just as Yukio had been. She was always there to help him out, whenever he had problems mastering certain spells. She was there to support him and cover for him, whenever he skipped class. She was always on his side and would listen to him, whenever he was sad or needed to express himself. In short, Hilo was the friend that Ranma always wished he had grown up with the first time around. And it was that fact, which annoyed Hilo to no end. She wanted to get closer to him, but Ranma always seemed to distance himself from her whenever things became more personal. "Ranma, what are you doing? You're not going to skip fluence class again, are you?" The boy shrugged as he prepared to leave. "Takamani-chan, you should know me by now. It's not like that fuddy-duddy fool Tess has anything full to teach me. He's so boring and those long-winded lectures of his always puts me to sleep. I think he just goes on and on because he likes the sound of his voice. Like a certain blue blunder I used to know." Ranma mentally added. "But Ranma, if you miss one more of his classes, he's going to put you on garbage detail again," Hila protested. "So I'll haul some more trash? Big deal. It's good strength training and the dump is one of the few places that I can get some privacy to practice." At that moment, a new voice was heard. "HMPF. The refuse dump is perfect for the likes of you. No, on second thought, you'd insult the garbage with your presence, Ranma." Both turned to see a trio of people standing nearby. Ranma growled as he faced off against his headache in the academy. Kyle. Standing behind him were his two cronies Argo and Sinlon. The pony-tailed apprentice snorted as he replied, "I'd rather be with garbage than you, Kyle. So would just about anyone else in the world." Kyle scowled at him. At age 14, he was a slender, devious-minded individual with short, blonde hair. He was considered to be the most proficient apprentice at the magic school, with the exception of Hilo and Ranma, and that was the fact that irritated him the most. Ranma, a virtual nobody that Carwes had picked up off the street, had risen through the ranks of the school, and attained a level of magic potency that rivaled even the senior apprentices and a few instructors. Kyle had come from a very prestigious family of magic users and had been expected to make top honors when he graduated. He had enrolled 7 years ago, and had at least a year of seniority over Ranma and Hila. Before they had arrived, he had been one of the most popular students. Everyone in his class wanted to be associated with him. He had been the talk of the campus. People feared him. People respected him. Then Ranma and Neela came to the school. Neela had astounded her instructors with her vast knowledge of magical incantations, items, and potion mixing. She was especially proficient with ancient languages and codes, and could decipher complex manuscripts. Despite her young age, her mental storehouse of information rivaled the Academy's best librarians and alchemists. And when Ranma appeared on the scene, with his amazing talent to learn powerful spells within short periods of time, and his martial arts prowess, Kyle's fame and reputation dwindled and he had found himself in a position that he disliked. Third place. Everyone was always talking about Neela's brilliance or Ranma's antics. He was getting sick of hearing Neela this or Ranma that. As a result, it had been his personal goal to outdo the both of them and reclaim his title as the #1 apprentice of Ofun's Magic Guild. The problem lay in how to go about doing it. He had tried intimidation, but Ranma didn't scare easily and such tactics usually resulted in quick and painful retaliation. With Ula at first, he had an easier time. Being younger, she was easier to scare, but once Ranma arrived and began constantly defending her against bullies, Kyle found himself back in the same situation. With every one of Ranma's triumphs, every victory, every challenge met and overcome, Kyle felt a little more of his own reputation eroding away. Things were getting personal. Going out again on one of your mindless training excursions again? Kyle taunted while his cronies chuckled behind him. At this rate, you'll be an old man before you graduate from second-class apprenticeship. HMPF. The martial artist snorted. As I recall, it was because of these mindless training excursions that allowed me to kick your sorry ass 3 weeks ago. Kyle snarled as he remembered back to when Ranma had been wearing that magic reduction manacle. He should have been able to beat him. Flashback. The main courtyard of the academy, where a crowd of people were gathered to watch the combatants. What now, Ranma? Kyle taunted as his battered and bruised opponent got up from the ground. That manacle on your arm has caused the potency of your spell-casting ability to be cut in half. You can't possibly cast any counter spells strong enough to withstand my attacks. The dark-haired boy growled as he reared back with his right arm, mumbled an incantation and thrust forward with palm spread. In his other hand was his magic wand. A red, fiery orb appeared in his right hand and shot out toward his rival. However, the metal bracelet on his right wrist glowed, causing the fireball he had created to be reduced in size. Kyle laughed as he held up his own wand and summoned forth a protective barrier. The projectile simply bounced off the shield and dissipated into wisps of smoke. "Ooh, I'm impressed," Kyle remarked with scorn. "You actually mastered the dragon's fire tongue attack. It's a good thing I learned the holy armor of light spell from Master Fultes. It's a pity you skipped that class, or you would have known about it too." high above the courtyard and watching from a balcony, Foltest smiled in triumph. He knew that the magic reduction manacle was just the thing to bring that arrogant disciple to his knees. After he was trounced, perhaps he'll finally learn not to cross his elders. And who better to teach him humility than his favorite pupil Kyle? Ranma snarled as he let loose with 5 more fireballs, all of which Kyle deflected. Then he tried a different tactic by leaping high in the air and firing down toward his rival's head. Kyle simply raised his wand up higher and the barrier appeared to turn away the projectile. So that's it. Ranma thought as he came back down. His barrier may be good protection, but it's got to be directed like a regular shield. It doesn't surround him. If he can't see my attack coming, then he won't be able to turn the barrier against it. He then made a check on himself and smiled as he discovered that his key stores were unaffected by the manacle. As Ranma landed on the ground, his adversary continued to taunt him. You can cast as many of those fireballs as you like, Ranma. It won't make any difference. My holy armor of light will deflect any oncoming attack and your magic is only working at half strength. You're just wasting energy and my time. Why don't you surrender? I might just show you mercy. Kyle's opponent let off a small chuckle as he casually turned to the crowd and addressed Hila. Hey Hila-chan. Can you hold on to this until after I beat the snot out of this loser? He held up his wand and tossed it to his friend. Hila caught the wand and looked back at her friend. Are you sure about this? Ranma gave her a wink as he faced off against his rival. Fluent's pet student laughed as he prepared to finish off his opponent. So, are you giving up? He sneered. Ranma gave Kyle a smirk as he held up his index finger. Nope, I'm just getting started. Kyle laughed even harder. He had heard about this spell. So you think that you can beat me with that lame bird spell of yours? You can only make the ground around you explode and you're nowhere near enough to affect me. And even if you were, the holy armor of light will protect me from all attacks. Yeah, well let's see if you can stop this. Breaking point technique revised. Ranma jammed his finger into the pavement. On cue, Kyle raised his wand in front of him and brought up his mystical shield. However, an instant later, the ground below him suddenly erupted. Puhwhom. What the? Everyone gasped in shock, as Kyle was sent skyward in a huge explosion of rock and dirt. Numerous rock fragments pelted his body, causing him to lose focus on his shield. At that point, Ranma leapt high and gave everyone a demonstration on the mid-air combat techniques of the Sodom School of the Anything Goes. Kyle didn't know what hit him as he was pummeled in all directions. By the time he hit the ground, his body was littered with various bruises and was sore in places that he didn't even know he had. He let off a pathetic moan and became unconscious, as Ranma landed in triumph amid a cheering crowd. Up in the balcony, Foltest fumed. Damn it. That magic reduction manacle should have made all of his magical powers ineffective. I can't believe he won. What's this I hear about a magic reduction manacle? Photoscoped as he turned around to a very grim-looking Carwes and Jenny. Isn't the use of magical items against the students forbidden by the Guild Council? Jenny said while keeping a hard gaze upon Photos. Yes, Photos. Why don't you explain yourself? Carwes said as he tapped his foot. Photoscoped as a cold sweat formed on his brow. End of flashback. Your so-called holy armor didn't mean squat against my traveling breaking point. And it was all thanks to what you called as my mindless training excursions. Ranma added with a smirk. Gee, don't think that I haven't forgotten how you cheated. Kyle spat back. What do you mean cheated? Gila couldn't, thereby turning Kyle and Ranma's attention to her. You're the one who challenged Ranma to the duel, and he had to fight with a handicap. Despite that magic reduction manacle, he still kicked your sorry butt. Gila's friend became a bit surprised to hear her speak that way, and wondered if she had been hanging around him too much. Stay out of this, Gila. Kyle snapped back while his cronies nodded in agreement. Even though he knew that he was losing this battle, he still wanted to get some measure. His sneer returned as he signaled for his cohorts that they were leaving. I'm going to class. Full test is going to take roll call soon, and I'm sure that he'll be happy to know that Ranma's not going to be there again. And I'm certain that he'll want to know who was responsible for what happened to Elder Curlis last Wednesday. Ranma's eyes narrowed. He wasn't certain as to how Kyle knew about that incident, but such a report would most definitely cause him and his friends trouble. Gila's friend Miki had been accused of cheating on an exam, and was about to get expelled, when Ranma had secretly tied up and blindfolded the accusing instructor to prevent him from arriving at the inquiry. With no accuser and Ranma later finding the real culprit, Miki was cleared of all charges. However, if it were known that he had resorted to such tactics, then you knew that, Gila said as she smiled sweetly at Kyle. And I'm sure Master Carwes would like to hear all about your involvement about that ugly incident last Monday. Kyle's face and that of his cronies suddenly paled as he was veiled threat. The blond boy found it difficult to find his voice for a few minutes before finally saying, "WW what? How? How do you know about?" The bespectacled girl's smile became more pronounced. "Oh, I had my ways. Now then, do you want to go first, or shall I?" Kyle turned about in a huff and stalked away. Argo and Simlon each gave Ranma and Elo a glare before following their leader. Once the trio was out of sight, Elo let loose with a sigh of relief. "So what exactly did Kyle do last Monday?" Ranma asked. The little sorceress in training shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know. Knowing Kyle, I just took a shot. I bluffed, and he folded." Ranma stood in utter disbelief as Ewa's words sunk in, then burst into peals of laughter, in which she readily joined in. "Sometimes I think Ewa is becoming another Nabiki," Ranma thought as he remarked, "Ewa-chan, you'd make one hell of a poker player." "Damn him," Kyle growled as he, Argo and Simlon sat in the classroom, waiting for a full test to arrive. I'll get Ranma yet. I don't know, Kyle. Maybe it's best that you leave him alone, Argo suggested. I mean, you've already challenged him several times, and lost every time, Simon added. Both boys cringed when Kyle growled and gave each of them a dangerous glare. Simon gulped, then said, I mean, with all those strange spells and fighting moves, I can't see how you can beat him. I'll beat him, just you wait, the snobbish teen sorcerer promised. Nobody makes a fool out of me. Nobody. It's just a matter of time before I learn his secrets. He gave his two companions another glare. Although you two haven't been much help, I thought I told you to follow him and find out how he's able to do all those things. We tried. Really. Argo whined. But we can't keep up with him. What are you talking about? I thought the both of you knew levitation and camouflage spells. Those alone should be enough for you to tail him whenever he goes off on those training trips of his. It's not that easy, Simon countered. It takes time for us to speak the incantation and focus our energies to rise a few feet, let alone get over the main gate. Ranma just jumps over the wall, and by the time we get on the other side, he's already long gone. Jumps over the wall, Kyle said in shock. That's got to be at least 40 feet high. And if we are lucky to spot him as he's heading into the woods, he always manages to lose us. Argo added. I swear that he knows when he's being followed, even though our camouflage spell is hiding us from sight. Then he starts hopping over treetops, and within a minute or so, he just disappears. Is he using some sort of teleport-ion spell? Simon shook his head. Not that we can figure. And for some reason, our SC-carrying spells can't track him either. All we get are erratic spiritual energy trails and that's it. You two are useless. Kyle growled as he and the rest of the class turned their attention to full test as he entered the class. The instructor seemed quite perturbed and one could guess that he displeased to see that Ranma had once again decided to skip the class. I find out your secrets someday, Ranma, Kyle thought. And when I do, you and I are going to have our final reckoning. Deep in the forest, Ranma took several cleansing breaths as he stood in a small clearing amid the tall trees. He felt a bit of nostalgia as he gazed about his surroundings. He hadn't been back to this particular spot since he had remastered the Hiri Shotenfa. Looking down at the ground, he smiled as he saw the faint outline of the spiral he had etched into the hardened clay over 6 years ago. It certainly brought back memories, clearing his mind of all distracting thoughts. Using several mediation and breathing techniques he had learned from his first training journey, he let his entire body begin to build its inner power. A faint blue aura of light appeared around this body as his ki levels gradually rose. Soon, it became a bright corona of power as it began synchronizing with the life forces of his natural surroundings. After a full minute, his aura reached a state of balance and Ranma's consciousness attained its peak. Ranma smiled. It had taken him years of dedicated training and many hardships to reach this level of control. Working with the handicap of reliving his early childhood, and armed with the knowledge of his former life, he felt that his skill levels had now exceeded that of his past life. And though he hated to admit it, the 6 years at the Magic Academy had resulted in some bonuses. Their meditation techniques were easily incorporated into his already impressive repertoire of mental disciplines, and energy manipulation went well with ki projection. With his mind and body focused, Ranma began going through a series of katas from various styles. He first began with basic karate and kung fu forms, then slowly began picking up speed. He switched over to Kempo and then flowed toward Jiu-Jitsu. Wushu and Jeet Kune Do quickly followed as he took advantage of their acrobatic moves. Before long, he began using Hapkido and some aspects of Muay Thai. As the session increased in intensity, he worked out his legs in a series of moves from Taekwondo and Capoeira. He then added some evasion maneuvers from Pakua, speeding up even faster. Finally, he finished off the exercises with several power blows from his fists and feet, utilizing an array of HSing, Wakai Ryu, and Choi Lifut. He finished off in a simple, neutral stance with hands clasped out in front of his chest and elbows bent. As he stood in silence, he smiled as he detected the presence of another nearby. He recognized the essence as the same one who had watched him when he had been younger. At that time, he had been unable to pinpoint his audience, but now his senses were sharper and he knew exactly where the person was. As he sensed no danger from the individual, he turned about and said out loud, "I know you're here. Come on out." There was only silence. "There's no point in hiding. I know you're right there." He plonked up towards a tree. "You're about 20 feet above the ground and standing on that branch. You've been watching me for the last half hour, right? You were the same person who watched me when I was younger. So why don't you drop whatever spell you are using to hide from me and show yourself? I won't bite." There was a long, tense moment of silence as Ranma waited for a response. Then the spot that he had plonked out suddenly shimmered as his audience revealed herself, giving Ranma his first look at the elf named Celestia. Ranma let off a low whistle as he beheld the pointy-eared beauty. Cool. A real elf. The elf looked to be in her mid to late teens, though she was actually older in reality. Though not immortal, her people aged far more slowly than humans, and at 84, Celestia was still considered to be young by elf standards. She had long blonde hair and large amber eyes. Her figure was lithe and slender. Her skin was fair and contrasted with the simple, green, short dress she was wearing. Her legs were bare and on her feet were soft, leather boots. As she looked down at the mage in training, she noted how much he had changed in the last half-dozen years. Humans grow up so fast. He was taller and his form was more defined. His face had lost much of the innocence it had in the past. He looked harder and emitted a kind of confidence. However, What interested her most about this youth was the fact that he was emitting some kind of power that she did not recognize. For a long while, the two simply gazed upon one another without uttering a single word. Finally, Celestia broke the silence. "How did you know that I was here?" Ranma shrugged as he replied nonchalantly. "It was easy. Your key stands out." The elf, of course, misunderstood. "Key? What are you talking about? I don't have any keys." The pony-tailed youth shook his head. "No, not that kind of key. I mean..." He paused as he tried to explain it to her. "I mean, the key in your body." "Key in my body? I don't understand. Are you saying that I swallowed the key?" Ranma was at a bit of a loss. Martial arts were mostly unknown in this world, and it was hard enough explaining the basics, let alone the advanced concepts of ki. He decided to demonstrate instead. Tensing up his leg muscles, he suddenly leapt up toward the tree branch that Celestia was standing on and landed on all fours. This, of course, started the forest nymph, causing her to almost fall backwards. Celestia gasped as she struggled to steady herself. When she got her balance back, she gazed upon the youth with renewed interest. "How did you do that?" She looked down at the ground, then back at Ranma. "It has to be at least 20 feet up here." "Well, I was using a bit of this." He held out a hand with the palm facing up and let some of his ki appear in a small ball. The elf looked upon the energy with vivid interest. It wasn't like any kind of elemental magic that she was familiar with. In a way, it resembled a shamanistic spell, but she couldn't discern what source he was drawing from. She hadn't heard any incantations, nor was he using any magic wands, talismans or any other kind of magic item. Ranma shrugged as he explained and dispersed the energy. "This what I call ki. It's sort of the life energy which is made by all living things, and it has two sides, which is called yin and yang. Yin and yang, you know, dark and light, good and evil, that sort of stuff. You've got it too, you know. It's just that you're more focused on using outside forces like elemental magic. I know that's tough too, but it's a lot more tiring than using my ki. Magic takes a while to build up and can leave you really drained afterwards. I only use magic when I need to. I've been studying martial arts for so long, using my ki is almost second nature to me." Celestia became even more intrigued to hear about a power that no one had ever heard about before. Before she could ask more about it, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps and decided to disappear from sight. "Ranma! Ranma! Are you there?" Zila called out as she looked about for her friend. "I'm up here," Ranma replied as he looked about for Celestia. Though he could have used his enhanced ki senses to find her, he decided to let her go as he leapt down to the ground to meet up with his classmate. As the two magic students left the forest, Celestia watched Ranma from her hiding place. He was certainly a very fascinating boy, and she hoped she'd see him again. A year later. "What? You're leaving?" Gila gasped as Ranma finished with packing his belongings into a backpack. She was also fascinated as he stowed away more possessions than what the pack seemed capable of holding. Objects that seemed bulky and ungainly seemed to disappear within the confines of the canvas carrier, without taking up any space at all. The 15-year-old said as he hefted the heavy pack onto his back. Though he didn't care for that nearsighted idiot, Goose's techniques were excellent for keeping one's luggage. But why? Gila tried her best to hold back her disappointment and tears. She and Ranma had grown up together and had gotten close. To pack him suddenly up and leave was a total shock to her. Ranma gave his friend a small smile and replied, "Hey, you knew from the start that I wasn't going to be here forever, right? This is the longest I've ever stayed in one place, though I've learned a lot. So why don't you stay here and finish your magic studies?" "What for? I didn't plan to becoming a sorcerer in the first place." "You didn't?" "No. Now don't get me wrong. Learning the magic stuff was great, but I don't want to depend on it for everything. I'm a martial artist, first and foremost. Besides, I feel the need to get out and see the world. I'm betting I can learn more stuff out there. Hey, don't worry. I'll be back someday, and I'll keep in touch between visits. You've been a great friend, Ila-chan, and I'll never forget you." "So, you're going?" The young sorceress could see the determination in her friend's eyes. Ranma had already decided and there was no changing his mind. Ranma could see the sadness in her eyes and took one of her hands in his own. Their eyes met and he gave her a whimsical expression, which made her brighten up a bit. It was then that he put an object in her hands. "What's this?" Gila asked as she held up a strange pendant. It was a broken half-circle with an image of the yin symbol. Gila's friend then held up another pendant which depicted the yang. He brought it together to join with Ula's pendant to complete the whole yin/yang symbol. He then put it around his neck. "I made these to always remind us how much we've shared and that we'll always be friends." Gila smiled as she accepted the gift and put it around her own neck. "So there's nothing that I can say to make you change your mind?" Carwes asked as he and Ranma stood at the gates to the Magic Academy. "You said that I could leave any time I wanted to, Pops." Ranma had taken to calling the Master Sorcerer as Pops as he had come to be like a father figure to him. He was certainly a better role model than Ranma ever was. "You had great potential, Ranma. You could be one of the most powerful sorcerers in the world." "Yeah, I could be," Ranma admitted. "But I think that I could learn more out there in the real world, instead of being cooped up in the academy all my life. Besides, I'm pretty sure that old fart Fultes would be happy if I weren't around to give him hell." He said that last sentence with a chuckle. Carwes couldn't help but laugh with his pupil, then patted the teen on the shoulder. "I can see the wanderlust in your eyes. They are the same as they were 7 years ago. Perhaps keeping you confined is holding you back from attaining your true potential. And I did say that you could leave when you wished. I will miss you, Ranma." "Same here." and I promise that I'll keep in touch and visit when I can. I shall look forward to seeing you again. Hey, Auntie Jenny. The head of the Church of Miley nodded as Ranma entered the shrine. Ranma, it's good to see you one last time before you left. I guess Pops told you that I'm leaving, right? Indeed. I'll miss our late-night training sessions. The former son of Ranma nodded. During the last 7 years, she had been secretly giving him lessons in swordplay and archery. In return, Ranma had taught Jenny the principles of shiatsu points, which he had learned from Dr. Tofu during his first life. Yeah, it was really fun and I learned a lot. Ranma nodded. It was then that Jenny brought out something for her favorite trainee. She had planned to give it to him later, but had decided that he could have it now. Here. If you intend to take up the life of an adventurer, then I believe this will come in handy. Ranma smiled as he took the gift in his hand and drew it from its scabbard. The short broadsword was finely forged and was well balanced. He gave it a few practice swings and admired its polished edge before returning it back to its scabbard. With a deft twist of the hand, he made it seemingly vanish from sight. Jenny smiled as she leaned forward and gave Ranma a gentle kiss on the forehead, then brought him close for an embrace. A while later, Ranma trudged up the hill path which headed east, away from the city of Ophun. And so, his journeys had started anew. 4 years later, in the forests outside of Ophun, a young, brown-haired girl gritted her teeth as she worked in vain to open up the entrance to a ruin. However, the stone slab proved to be extremely stubborn and she nearly broke the blade of her dagger. She had spent a good amount of time chipping away the stone, but it eventually became obvious to even a non-magic user that the entrance had been mystically sealed. Darn! I'm sure that this place has some treasure, Meryl stated as she got up and faced her two companions, Melissa and Jeannie. But I'm also pretty sure that this thing's magically sealed. Melissa nodded as she confirmed her friend's assessment. She was a very young and pretty priestess of the Church of Miley. Yes, I can sense the signs of some very strong sealing magic. Well, can't you open it up? The priestess shook her head. I'm afraid that I don't know any spells that can undo locking enchantments. Meryl looked over to her other partner, who happened to be a tall, muscular, darkly tanned, red-haired woman, with a huge longsword strapped to her back. Jeannie shook her head. Don't look at me. I don't know anything about magic and this thing's too strong for even me to pry open. You know, I think this would go a lot quicker if we had a magician, Meryl suggested. Just then, the trio were put on their guard as a horde of goblin monsters suddenly appeared from the surrounding forest. The three decided to retreat and rethink their strategy. A couple of days later, a lone figure walked in the streets of Ophum and breathed in the city air. He was a tall individual, with a lean, but muscled form. His steps were light and sure and he seemed to emit a subtle aura of confidence surrounding him. He was dressed simply in a red, short-sleeved tunic, with dark loose leggings, bracers on his wrists, form-fitting leather boots, and a black flowing, hooded cloak draped over his shoulders. Tucked in his belt was a small wooden wand. Slung over one shoulder, he had a simple staff, and hanging from it was a heavy backpack. His long raven hair was loosely tied in a single ponytail. Ranma, aged 19, chronologically 30, was back. The sorcerer and martial artist smiled a bit when his familiar popped his head out from under the flap of his backpack. On its forehead was a strange, line pattern of white fur, which contrasted with the rest of its reddish-brown pelt. One little shin gave off a small yawn and looked about, taking in the sights of the city. The kitten then looked down at his master with its violet-colored eyes and twitched its left ear. Ranma nodded back at his mystical companion and nodded in understanding. Yep. This is Ophogan. He looked about to get his bearings. It's been a while since I've been here. Let's see. If I remember right, then the Laughing Swan Tavern should be that way. He gestured toward a direction and headed toward the center of the city. Trust me, you'll like Hila. And I'm sure she's gonna really like you, Shin. Yeah, I know. Rune Cat and all. But she's not like those other people. The cat said with a hidden implied meaning to it. Hey! You can't blame that one on me. That wasn't my fault either. That jerk was asking for it. Now you don't think I did that and... Oops. Rip. While arguing with his rune cat, Ranma wasn't paying attention to where he was going and tripped over a loose cobblestone. His pack made him top-heavy and he couldn't stop his forward motion. He instinctively grabbed for anything to stop him from falling. Unfortunately, what he caught hold of was a young girl's skirt, specifically a young thief by the name of Meryl, who was currently calculating her net assets. This act exposed her panties and the results were predictable. You pervert! Meryl screamed. Hey! Now wait just a minute. Ranma said as he desperately tried to get a hold of the situation before the inevitable. WHAP. A little while later, Ranma snorted as he continued on toward his destination. He had a slight, red imprint of a hand on his right cheek, which was almost faded away. In his backpack, Shin let off a happy little noise that seemed to say, "Now that was funny." "Oh, be quiet," the young midge said in irritation. "It was an accident. She didn't have to get so mad. Jeez. Why is it that every time something happens, it's always blamed on Ranma? I got enough of that during my first life. Now don't you start." At that moment, he heard a commotion in a nearby alleyway. He decided to investigate as he wasn't scheduled to meet up with her until the next day. When he came to the spot, he saw that a trio of thugs were accosting a tall and very muscular, red-haired woman. One was armed with a short sword, while the other two had daggers. As a martial artist, he immediately began assessing the female. Lots of strength, and some considerable sword skills, judging by that sword. She's slower than me and doesn't move much like a martial artist, so I'd say that she's like Kuno. Separate her from her weapon and she'd be at a disadvantage. She could probably take on those three losers. No. Why should I get involved? It's not like she needs help against those idiots. Meow, meow, mew. Now don't you start with that martial artist's duty to protect the weak thing. That got me in a lot of trouble back then, and besides, she don't look weak, at least not much. Unskilled and undisciplined, yeah. Has a temper to match, probably. Fights like a drunken gorilla, maybe. Wouldn't know what to do without a sword, most likely. But even uncute tomboys like her should be able to handle three brain-dead dopes with just brute force alone. What did you say? Ranma winced as he realized that Genie and her attackers had hurt him. He sighed and shook his head while pinching the bridge of his nose. Damn. After all this time, I should have learned to keep my mouth shut by now. Oh well, no help for it. Genie looked at the stranger who had been arguing with his cat, and inadvertently thrown insults concerning her fighting skills. She had taken offense at his disregard for her battle prowess. She was a battle-hardened, first-class soldier. How dare this peon regard her as an uncute tomboy? Though she was unfamiliar with that term, it got her blood boiling nonetheless. As for her attackers, they weren't exactly pleased to be referred to as idiots and brain-dead dopes. They had initially intended to rob Genie, but this newcomer seemed to have more things for them to take. Surely he must have a few valuables in that backpack. So they decided to attack him instead. Jiwa's friend shrugged as his body tensed up. Shin also tensed up as he prepared to spring out of the pack to aid his master. But that was when Ranma tossed his pack high into the air. Ranma then dropped his staff and easily ducked under the first thug's attempt to slash at his head. Grabbing the extended arm, he twisted the wrist, causing his foe to scream out in pain and releasing his grip on the sword. Ranma then turned inwards and flipped the thug over his shoulder, slamming him into the pavement. A quick kick to the face knocked him out. The second attacker tried to blindside him by rushing toward Ranma's back, but the martial artist simply brought his right elbow back and jabbed it into his assailant's gut. This caused him to double over, but a follow-up backfist to the face caused him to snap up straight, then topple backward into unconsciousness. The third robber leaped after seeing his two companions taken out so easily. He looked down at his weapon, then back at Ranma. Though his target was unarmed, he was uncertain if he could take on the martial arts mage. He became even more nervous as Ranma gestured to him with his hands, daring him to approach. Come on. Impress me. Summoning up all the desperate courage he had, the last robber let off a suicidal cry and lunged at Ranma, aiming for his abdomen. However, Ranma evaded the attack by simply pivoting on his left foot while raising his right foot high. He then brought the leg down and laid his final opponent low with a heel drop to the back of his neck. After dusting himself off, he casually picked up his staff and held it out. He then counted down. 3, 2, 1, 0. At that moment, His pack came back down and was easily caught at the end of his staff before it hit the ground. Jeannie could only stare in total disbelief at what she had just witnessed. Shin popped his head out from the pack and started to angrily chide his companion. Meow! Meow! R-O-W-R! R-O-W-R! Meow! Ranma couldn't help but smirk at his friend's indignation. Oh come on, Shin. I would think you'd be used to that by now. Shin became even more irritable at his friend's attempt at humor at his expense. Suddenly, his violet eyes started to glow with an eerie light. Oh. Now hold on a minute, Shin. K-boom. What the? Jeannie didn't even have time to finish her scream as she and Ranma were engulfed in a sudden explosion. Some more time later. Hey! Wake up! You still alive? Jeannie groaned as she opened her eyes and saw a blurry image of someone kneeling over her. As her eyesight cleared, she felt her whole body throb with pain. Her temper immediately returned as she beheld Ranma and his rune cat. Shin was currently perched on his right shoulder. Why you? P-R-R-G-G-G-H. Jeannie tried to get up, but her body wouldn't cooperate with all the bruises and aching muscles. Ranma had no trouble in deflecting her feeble attempts to hit him. It was then that she noticed that the alleyway was now a devastated ruin and there was a huge crater with the three thugs sprawled near the center. She and Ranma were currently outside of the alley. You're lucky I managed to cast a protective barrier to deflect most of the blast away from us and our attackers, Ranma said as he assessed her injuries, then gave Shin a look of disapproval. Shin tends to overreact during his temper tantrums. The rune cat gave off an apologetic noise as he decided to retreat back into Ranma's pack. Just then, the local constables began approaching the scene. Knowing that they'd never let him explain the circumstances, Ranma decided to leave the scene. After casting a quick recovery spell for Jeannie, he leapt high and used a nearby wall to bound upwards toward a rooftop. In a heartbeat he was gone. How did he do that? Jeannie wondered momentarily, then saw that she too needed to vacate the premises. As the pain in her body suddenly lessened, she immediately picked herself up and ran, just as the local law enforcement officers arrived at the scene of the carnage. You're late, Meryl said as she and Melissa sat at a table at an inn. They both noticed that their swordswoman companion was in a haggard state as she sat down. Sorry. Something happened on the way here, Jeannie explained as she asked the bartender for a mug of ale. So did you find a magician? Both girls shook their heads. Just about all the magic users in Ulfam and birds. Meryl sighed. All they want to do is study. There isn't anyone who wants to go adventuring. Melissa nodded. Master Carwest is quite strict at the Magic Academy and I do not believe he would allow any of his students to be taken away from their studies. Isn't the Order of Miley strict as well? Jeannie pointed out as she took a slug of ale. Melissa shook her head. No, battle is one of the duties of our order and Master Jenny won't stop any of her disciples from adventuring. It was then that the youngest member of their group got an inspiration. Hey, I know. There's a pub that's nearby where most of the magic users go to. I think it's called the Laughing Swan. Maybe we can get a sorceress there. Alright, it's agreed. Jeannie said as she finished off her ale. Melissa also decided on Meryl's suggestion. The next day. I wonder where Ranma is. He's over a day late. Zila thought as she waited in the tavern. She was anxious to see her childhood friend after all this time. He had been keeping in touch with letters and the occasional visit, and Zila always looked forward to whenever he decided to drop by. Master Carwes and Jenny were equally looking forward to seeing their favorite pupil. You're a sorceress, aren't you? Zila dispelled thoughts of Ranma as she was brought back to reality by Meryl's question. She looked up at the thief and her two companions. Yes, I am. And who are you? Hi, I'm Meryl. This is Jeannie and Melissa. We're adventurers. Adventurers? Oh, that must be so exciting. My friend Ranma is an adventurer too. You three must find lots of treasure. Well, not really, Meryl admitted. Lately, the pickings had been very slim, and with all the adventuring groups out there, it was a challenge to just break even, let alone make any profit. Currently, they were deep in the red. If you find any treasure or magical items, I'll gladly buy them from you. Zila offered. In the past, Ranma had given her several mystical objects and such from his escapades, and she was eager to acquire more. In his last letter, he had told her that he had come across a rune cat, and she was anxious to study that rare and valuable animal. Zila's offer caught the three adventurers off guard as they were hoping to enlist her services. No, that's not what we wanted to discuss with you, Melissa said. Yeah, we were kind of hoping that you could come along with us, Meryl asked. You see, we've come across a ruin that just might have some treasure, but it's sealed with magic and come with you. Zila shook her head, causing the three girls' faces to show expressions of disappointment. I'm sorry, but I can't abandon my studies. The only person I know who could help you is my friend Ranma. Is Ranma a good magician? Meryl asked hopefully. Zila nodded. Oh yes, very good. Ranma happens to be one of the top apprentices, despite being away from the Magic Academy for more than 4 years. One of my friend's specialties is casting and undoing locking spells. Unsealing a magic door shouldn't much of a problem. Ranma also has a talent for battle magic, so adventuring isn't a problem either. In fact, Ranma's been doing it for more than 4 years now. Sounds promising, Jeannie admitted. Yes, a godsend from my league. Melissa nodded. Great. Sounds like your friend Ranma is just the sorceress we need. So when can we meet her? Meryl inquired excitedly. Zila was taken aback by the three's assumption that Ranma was female. Just then, a certain someone came in through the Laughing Swan's front door. Hey, Zila-chan. Zila called back. The adventurers cried out as they beheld him. To be continued. Author's notes: I never thought this story would have such a huge response, but I decided to finish off this chapter anyway. I've already seen the entire Rune Soldier Louie series and it was enjoyable. My attempt on Rune Soldier Ranma will take a more serious turn from time to time, like Record of Loadouts, but there will be a few chuckles and such along the way. The next chapter, if I ever get back to writing this thing again, will deal with Ranma's initial confrontations with the group. Naturally, they won't take the male into their group and Ranma will take offense to their discrimination in his own way. We'll also take a look back at what had happened in Miramar after Ranma disappears. 1. Ranma's pet and familiar is a rare rune cat, sort of like the pet that Cleo has in Sorcerer Stabber Orphan. Since he doesn't have the Nakoken anymore, it's kind of ironic that he would have a feline to help harness his magical ability. Shin is powerful but he has a tendency for mischief and is easily irritable. Asterisk Chapter 5 Asterisk Chapter 4 Part 1 Are you sure about TH? Rune Soldier or anime disclaimer, Ranma 1/2 and Rune Soldier Louie belong to their own creators, so don't blame them for this mess. Thoughts Chapter 4 Part 1 Are you sure about this? Meryl cried out. Absolutely not. Jeannie agreed. This is unacceptable. Melissa concurred. Wow! I can't believe you found a rune cat. Zila exclaimed as Ranma's familiar came out of his pack and landed lightly on the table. As always, the intellectual side of her personality made her forget everything else. Zila, meet Shin. Shin, this is Zila, one of my best buddies, Ranma said as he introduced the two. Shin nuzzled against Zila's extended hand as she petted him. He liked her scent and her mystical presence was nice. Oh, he's so cute. Zila gushed. Where did you find him? Actually, I didn't find him. He found me. Ranma replied. I was traveling around the Kaitorian mountain range 3 months ago. One morning, I found him in my pack and... Hey! Are you listening to the United States? Meryl said irritably as she and the other members of her group found themselves being ignored. The two magicians and the rune cat looked back toward the trio, who were more than irritated. The looks on Meryl and Jeannie were especially sour as they glared at Eva's childhood companion. Ranma, however, was used to such expressions, as he recognized the thief and female warrior. Knowing that they'd probably try to bash his brains in, regardless of what he would do or say, some things never changed. He gave them a friendly smile anyway. Hey there. I didn't expect to see you two again. Meryl gritted as she fingered her throwing knives. Jeannie agreed as she moved her right hand toward her broadsword. Zila, of course, was confused at their sudden hostility at her friend. Certainly Ranma was sometimes crude and rubbed people the wrong way, but his base honesty was one trait, which defined his unique personality. It was a characteristic that she liked. Ranma, have you met these people already? Please forgive us. Zila apologized. We did not mean to forget about you. Now about Ranma joining your group. We don't need a man. Meryl said adamantly. That's right. There's nothing more useless than a stupid male. Jeannie agreed. Melissa nodded, though she tried to keep civil. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that we cannot accept your friend Ranma, because I'm a guy. Ranma said simply with a sarcastic tone. Oh, that's a really good reason. HMPF. Gila said as she tried to keep things friendly. I'm sure that Ranma would be an excellent addition to your group and... forget it, Gila-chan. Ranma said with a shrug as he propped his feet up on the table. Shin bounded into his lap and snuggled close while he began stroking the cat's back. If these three wannabe adventurers don't want my help, then let them go. How dare you? Jeannie growled as she was one heartbeat away from drawing her sword and running him through. We've had more adventures than you. You're a novice compared to us. Hold it, please. Gila held up her hands again to try and defuse the situation. She then gave her friend a disapproving look. Ranma, I'm surprised at you. I thought you had better manners than this. The warrior midge shrugged again. I only reserve my manners for those who give me the same. Besides, if they're gonna keep on insulting me, just because I'm a guy, then I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be allowed to voice my own opinions. He gestured with his thumb at the girls, particularly to the swordswoman. I'd received better courtesy from a ravenous pack of jackals than from them. The trio had just about enough of Ranma's snide remarks and got up to leave. Fine then. We don't need you. Meryl spat out. You probably couldn't open a sealed door anyway. This caught Ranma's interest as he asked Gila. Sealed door? Gila nodded. Yes. You see, these three want to get into some ruins and they can't get past a mystical seal at the entrance. Ruins? You mean like the one sealing the Myronal ruins about 10 leagues north of Ophun? Those kinds of seals I can handle, no problem. This remark caught the girls' attention as they stopped in their tracks and turned around. They had just been to those ruins 7 days ago. As far as they could tell, no one had been able to get past that seal. The combined strength of all three of them couldn't even budge it. They had been forced to give up trying to get into it. Afterwards, they had come across their current endeavor with no better luck. If he could get by such barriers, you really know how to open those kinds of seals? Melissa asked slowly with slight interest. Ranma gave her an off-handed wave and nodded. Oh yeah. Most ruins are sealed with an elemental bonding spell. The entrance door becomes closely linked with the surrounding rock, metal or whatnot. The harder you chip at it, the stronger the bond becomes. You need to bypass the enchantment and dispel it, in order to pry the door loose. Not exactly something for a first-year apprentice. I've had my share of getting past those kinds of defenses and some variations, so I should know what I'm talking about. Gila smiled proudly at them. See? I told you he knew. The three females then moved off to one side and huddled. He seems to know how, Melissa said slowly. You're not really thinking of letting him come with us, are you? Jeannie asked angrily. Ranma's cocky attitude and lack of respect toward her skills had already gotten her temper near boiling range. Well, it's not like we had much of a choice. We've been turned down everywhere else. He may be our best chance. At that point, their youngest member started to reconsider. Melissa's got a point. If what he says is true, then we need someone with more experience. Of course, he's nowhere as good at getting into places as I am, but I can't believe the two of you are actually thinking of letting him come with us. Jeannie almost shouted. We don't need a man in our group. Well, why don't we test him? Meryl suggested. If he can actually get it open like he says, then we'll give him a little bit of the treasure. If he can't, then we can just drop him. But Meryl, Jeannie was adamant against letting Ranma join their team. Jeannie, just how much do you owe the tax collector now? Meryl asked simply. The swordswoman was taken aback by her companion's point. With the lack of bounties and the city at peace, the female warrior had been out of work for some time. There were no wars for her to fight as a mercenary soldier, and raiding ruins so far had not been very profitable. Meryl nodded at her friend's silence. You, me and Melissa are in deep right now. We owe a lot of people for all those supplies, and we're behind in our tax payments. We need to score really big this time. At that moment, they heard Ranma's voice call out to them and turned to him. Hey! Me and Neela-chan have been talking about it, and maybe I was a little rude. So how about this? I'll give you a freebie. First sealed door I open, I won't ask for anything. Whatever treasure you find, it's all yours. How about it? Later. Okay, now get this straight. Jeannie growled as she, Melissa, Meryl and Ranma walked through the markets in search of supplies. We're only letting you tag along with us because we need to get past that seal. Don't think that we're going to let you become a member of our group. Ranma casually waved her words off. Yeah, whatever. I already promised that you three can have whatever is in those ruins. I just want to show you that I can undo that seal. So which ruins are we going to? Well, they're located about 2.5 leagues south of Ophun, Melissa said. Ranma stopped suddenly, then gave the priestess a funny look. You want to get into those ruins? Yes, is something wrong? Well, yes and no. There are a couple of things you should know about those ruins. Like what? Those goblin monsters? Meryl asked. Jeannie snorted with disdain. HMPF. We already know about those things and we can handle them. Ranma shrugged. Well, yeah, there's the goblins, but what? Melissa inquired. Well, I really think you should try another place. Like the Tetrahol ruins in Atlans. Atlans? That's over 150 leagues away. Meryl exclaimed. We don't have the time to go that far. We need to score some treasure soon. Yes, and I think we got us a liar and a weakling. Jeannie said as she glared at the martial artist and Midge. This was an opportunity to get rid of this jerk. Ranma took offense to Jeannie's accusation and faced her down. And what do you mean by that? I mean that I think you don't really know how to open a sealed door and you're just trying to make an excuse not to go to these ruins. Why else would you suggest another place that's too far away? Jeannie said with scorn. Ranma's temper began to boil as he recognized this kind of scenario all too well. Just what was it with NQ tomboys and their tendency to jump to conclusions without listening to him first? And again, once the NQ tomboy had made an accusation, other females in the vicinity would naturally agree and, "You big fake." Meryl chimed in as she pointed an accusing finger at him. "How dishonorable," Melissa stated as her holier-than-thou upbringing came to the fore. "What kind of man are you? A true gentleman would never consider such deceit. Admit it. You're all talk," Jeannie accused. "You probably wouldn't know how to open a normal door if you had the key, let alone a magic seal. Just what I'd expect from a man." Ranma's temper started towards its peak. Here he was, trying to be civil and make an alternative suggestion, but these girls wouldn't even give him a chance. "This sound familiar?" Right parenthesis. He had a good mind to abandon them right then and there, but decided that they should be taught a lesson on judging a person by his gender. Keeping his anger in check, but just barely, he growled at them. "Fine then. You want to get into those ruins? I'll open it up easily and like I said before, you can everything that's in it." "Fuck. I'd like to see that," Jeannie snorted as their group continued through the market. "You expect me to carry all this crap? For all three of you?" Ranma said as he stood before a sizable pile of weapons, herbs, foodstuffs and other supplies, some of which were not even full by his standards, like Melissa's fine porcelain tea set. Spending 10 years of training with Ranma had taught him the value of traveling with just the essentials. "What's the matter?" Jeannie taunted. "Is the great magician afraid to do a little manual labor? Don't want to exert yourself? Yeah. Since you're new, you're going to have to start at the bottom." Meryl nodded. "Working with one's hands is one of the great lessons of life, which builds character," Melissa stated. Ranma said as he laid down his backpack and opened up the top flap. Jeannie's smirk became even more pronounced. It would be sheer pleasure to watch this arrogant struggle under the weight of all this equipment. If he was going to store it in his pack, then it would be even more humorous. However, that was when Ranma surprised them all as he took each and every item and made them seemingly disappear into his pack with a sudden blurring of his arm. When the last of the supplies were stowed away, the warrior Midge hefted the pack over one shoulder as easily as one would carry an empty gunny sack. The fact that its outer shape remained unchanged was not lost to them. In fact, Shin poked his head out from under the top flap and yawned. By all rights, the cat should have been crushed by the sheer weight of the things Ranma had packed away. How did you do that?" Melissa asked. Jeannie snorted again and turned her head up and away from Ranma. "HMPF. He just cheated and used some kind of magic spell." Maybe that packet is his magic, or that magic cat had something to do with it. The ponytailed martial artist stated, I only use spells when I need to, and what I did wasn't magic. Shin had nothing to do with what I just did. You're right, Jeannie said as she continued to look down on him. Ranma snorted again as he motioned for Shin to perch on his right shoulder. He then held out the pack in his left hand and faced Jeannie. So you don't believe that I could have gotten all that stuff in this pack without magic, eh? So why don't you carry it? He then tossed the pack toward the red-haired warrior. Jeannie, not expecting the pack to be very heavy, casually held out her arms. However, WHUMP. Both Melissa and Meryl cried out. Jeannie was flat on her back and struggling to get the crushing weight of the pack off her chest. She felt as if she was under a ton of rocks. Both her companions went to the right and tried to move the backpack, but it wouldn't budge. As she gasped and strained to free herself, she looked up and saw Ranma grinning above her. What's the matter, you uncute tomboys? Surely you can lift a pack? Or is it because you don't want to exert yourself? Ranma mimicked top left parenthesis one. Jeannie snarled in absolute rage. He was going to pay for this. By mid-afternoon, Ranma and the group arrived at the entrance to the ruins. There were no goblins inside at the time, which gave the magic martial artist time to prepare his unlocking spell. He took out a small vial of liquid from his pack and uncorked it. He then made a small quill appear and dipped its tip into the liquid. Kneeling down, he began drawing symbols into the mystically enchanted slab, which was the door to the ruins. Jinmen, Jinku, Dukeru. Jinmen, Jinku, Dukeru. Jinmen, Jinku, Dukeru. Ranma began chanting as he continued to draw mystic inscriptions. Melissa looked in confusion at the symbols that Ranma was drawing into the stone. They looked like nothing of the ancient runes she had seen in the old texts. She had some training in spell casting, but these chicken scratches Ranma was drawing made no sense whatsoever. What she didn't know that Ranma had been working on his own brand of magic during his 4-year adventuring journey. He had reasoned that if he could use something else, besides than his magic wand as a medium, then he could cast spells to further enhance his key abilities and vice versa. To that end, he remembered back to the ancient Japanese legends of the Oni and the stories he had learned during his travels through China. He and Ranma had raided, visited a lot of temples, and he had perused a few ancient scrolls. Through a lot of trial and error, during his travels through this medieval world, he had finally begun to create effective spirit wards and magic scrolls for specific purposes. All in Japanese kanji, of course. After several minutes of chanting and drawing, the girls began to get impatient. How much longer is this going to take? Meryl complained. Yes, when will this door be opened? Melissa asked with some indignation. HMPF. If we can actually get this thing opened, then it'll be a miracle. Jeannie scoffed. Ranma stopped in his spell casting to give the girls a harsh glare. Then he sarcastically said to no one in particular, "Those of us who have been trained in magical incantations and spellbinding, raise your hand." He raised his hand briefly. "Those of us who have opened magical doors before, raise your hand." He raised it again. "Does anyone here have any idea how to unlock this binding spell?" Up went his hand again. "Any questions?" "No." There a bit of a silence as Ranma's subtle insult sank in, causing the three girls' tempers to rise several degrees. Ignoring their irritation, he finished off drawing the kanji and continued infusing them with mystical energy and ki. A few moments later, the writing let off a bright flare of light and wisps of green mist emerged from the edges of the slab. When the spell was completed, the kanji vanished from sight. "Okay, that's it. The locking spell has been undone. Not a bad piece of work if I do say so myself." Ranma got up and dusted himself off. He then walked over to a small boulder and sat down on it. Shin appeared from his pack and lightly jumped down to sit in his master's lap. Rune started stroking his back. "That's it?" Meryl asked in surprise. "You just drew a few symbols on that rock and said some strange words. The slab is still there." Ranma shrugged. "The locking spell that held that door in place is gone. The only thing that's left is that piece of granite, and I'm sure that 3 expert adventurers like you shouldn't have any problems with 100 pounds of rock. I did my part, and like I told you, everything that's in this place is all yours." The paladin of the group snarled at Ranma's taunts. He was just asking for a pounding, and she made a note to do just that after she and her companions had obtained the treasure. Hefting her longsword, Jeannie wedged the point into one side and began prying open the door. Sure enough, the heavy block of stone slowly began moving and daylight streamed down a flight of rocky steps. With some effort, she upended the massive chunk of granite, which crashed down with a loud thud. The entrance to the ruins was now open to the 3 girls. Meryl took the lead with a magical torch that the priestess had provided her with. Her innate greed came to the fore as she eagerly began taking the first steps. She couldn't wait to get her hands on the untold wealth of gold and jewels she imagined they would find. Melissa and Jeannie were also eager to see their luck change as they began descending down the stairs. "Oh, one thing I think you should know," Ranma called after them. "If you think you're going to get a share of the treasure, forget it." Meryl shouted back. "Yes. You said that you did not want any. A true gentleman should always keep his word. You've already proven that you're no gentleman," Melissa said with a snobbish air. "I only wanted to." Ranma tried again but was cut off by Jeannie. "We don't need you anymore, so just shut up. We're the experts, and you're the rookie. So stay out of this." The magic warrior sighed and nodded. "Okay. I won't say another word. Good luck." Jeannie smiled smugly as she followed her friends down into the ruins. Shin stretched out on Ranma's lap and sat up, while gazing upon his master. "Yeah, I know." Jiwa's friend nodded as he stroked behind Shin's left ear. "But what could I do?" She told me to shut up, so I did. Sheesh, it's just like back in Mirima. No girl ever wanted to listen to what I wanted to say, especially certain uncute tomboys. Even when I had something really important to say. Meow, 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 roar. Hey, I tried to tell them that I had raided these ruins 3 years ago. Heck, I was the one who set up that locking spell in the first place. This is the first time I had to undo my own magic. Meow, brr. Well, there wasn't much in there. I found about 6 pounds of gold coins, 2 pounds of silver and 3 or 4 handfuls of gems. Not very good quality either. Considering the trouble I went through to get them, it wasn't much. Meow, meow. What kind of troubles? Well, let me think. Oh yeah. First off, I almost broke my neck going down those steps. There are some brittle steps halfway down that will break apart under the slightest pressure. WHUMP. Crash. Bang. Thump. Meryl groaned as she painfully sat up at the bottom of the stairs. She had fallen end over end after she had inadvertently stepped on a crumbling step. Meryl, are you all right? Jeannie called down as she took a tentative step forward. However, her foot came down on another loose step, causing her to fall forward. In desperation, she grabbed for something for support. In this case, it was Melissa. The priestess cried out as the muscled warrior woman grabbed hold of her skirts. This put her off balance and the two began tumbling down toward their diminutive companion. Meryl was just recovering from her trip down the stairs when she looked up and saw her partners coming down toward her. Crash! Ranma smirked as he caught the sounds of certain people's antics. He used a magical technique to enhance his hearing. Good thing I learned how to fall safely and avoid injury. Meow, mew. Any other dangers? Well, the stairs lead down toward a cavernous maze. Hope they don't make too much noise or those stalagmites are going to come crashing down on top of them. Meow, meow. Oh, they're called stalactites, not stalagmites. I always get those two mixed up. Look out! Jeannie cried out as she used her sword to bat away the falling spikes of limestone. However, her very shout caused more to come down on top of them. After a mad dash through the maze, the three were bruised and battered and their clothes were disheveled and tattered. They thought the worst was over as they came into a very wide space, but... And then there were those giant slime devils to worry about. Yeah. You know the kind that can dissolve metal in seconds. I almost ruined the sword Aunt Jenny gave to me. They're eating my daggers. Meryl cried out as her weapons were dissolved by the gelatinous blobs. Melissa gritted her teeth as she swung her warhammer. Though it was constructed of enchanted steel, it too was beginning to weaken and corrode from the caustic fluids of the slime devils. Jeannie found that her best sword techniques were next to useless against these foes as they easily withstood her slashes and thrusts. Her blade began melting away and she shuddered to think what their fluids would do to the human flesh. I hope they don't do something stupid like use fire or anything hot against those things. Shin agreed wholeheartedly. Yeah, those things are like ticking time bombs. Only an idiot would light their fuses. Let's see how they like this. Jeannie cried out as she swept up the torch and drove it into a slime devil. This caused it to explode. In her face. WHABOM. This in turn caused a chain reaction with the others. Boom. 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 Ranma noted the rocks on the ground were shaking from a sudden series of slight tremors. He shrugged and went back to petting his rune cat. Ah, don't worry. They survived. They may be a little on the crispy side, but they're still alive. How do I know? Easy. Just listen. The rune cat used his own extraordinary senses. Sure enough, he heard. I never thought a priestess of Miley would know such language. Mouth smoking a bit, the three girls made their way to what appeared to be a hidden temple. Their spirits picked up as they believed that they had found the place where all the treasure lay. When Meryl caught sight of a huge chest with a padlock, she immediately ran toward it and began working on opening it with her lock-picking tools. Jeannie and Melissa gave off a sigh of relief. After all they had endured, they were finally going to be rewarded. That was when they heard something coming toward them from the shadows. Oh yes, I almost forgot the main reason why I sealed away those ruins in the first place. Yep. There's one huge nest of goblin monsters down in that old temple. The ones those girls saw were just the tip of the iceberg. The majority was sealed away after I got all the treasure. Jeannie, Melissa and Meryl found themselves surrounded on all sides as the goblin monsters advanced on them en masse. There seemed to be no way out as the hordes closed in on them. They were already exhausted from their trials and their weapons were next to useless against the dozens of goblins that were about to tear them apart. Meryl gulped as she saw the murderous monsters about to attack. She had so close to making a big score. Then she decided that if she was going to die, then she would at least see just how rich they would have been. In less than a heartbeat, she managed to work out the last tumbler of the padlock, causing it to snap open. Then she looked into the chest and her face became drained of all color. Jeannie and Melissa also looked back to the chest and they too became shocked as they saw not treasure, but 3 words written on the inside of the lid of the empty container. Ranma was here. The 3 felt an intense anger building within them. It first started as intense spark, which then started to expand. Soon their entire beings were filled with rage until they were unable to contain it. Then they all screamed simultaneously the same familiar phrase. Ranma, you jerk. 3. Oh well, here I go again, saving uncute tomboys from their own stubbornness. Ranma sighed as he dropped his pack to the ground, stood up and held his staff out. Shin landed lightly on his feet and faced his master.